A red-haired man in a bath addresses a pink-haired baby as Elizabeth, who babbles in response. The baby, Elizabeth, reflects on her new life, where she can even receive rewards. She reveals that she has memories of a previous life as a blue-haired woman, which is why she wants this new life to last forever. In a flashback, a newborn baby with blue-green hair cries. She recalls that in her past life, before being summoned, she was known as Liz. In her past life, Liz studied hard in the kingdom of Altode, hoping for a family while learning of a power shift from the royal family. She read about the infamous Tyrant family, known for their blazing red hair. The family's war demon, Michael, was known for crushing rebellious nobles with sheer force. The femme fatale, Adelina, created arbitrary laws but also a merit-based system to recruit talented people. Reading about their history, Liz hoped to avoid their ruinous fate. She recalls entering the royal palace's government affairs office at age 15. Despite her position, she was immediately met with disrespect as papers were thrown in her face. As a commoner, she was treated unfairly, even while others discussed helping the poor. Her meal is disgustingly thrown on her head by a noble who complains about the food for lowly people. Another noble mocks her hunger, but Liz endures the humiliation. However, first Queen Claudia Altode, a revered figure, acknowledges Liz's suffering and expresses faith in her unique commoner's perspective. Queen Claudia gently comforts the tearful Liz, showing her kindness and support. Liz was eventually entrusted with her most important duty, managing the national treasure, the magic crystal. A sudden tension builds as a hand reaches for a door. Suddenly, a blonde girl with glowing eyes brandishes a dagger, and Liz watches in horror as the incident unfolds. The blonde girl raises an alarm, claiming a thief is trying to steal the magic crystal. The girl, revealed to be the queen's daughter, accuses Liz, who protests her innocence, but Queen Claudia dismisses her, regretting appointing a commoner. In a shocking betrayal, Liz is surrounded by royal guards, with swords drawn as the queen and her daughter look on. The queen's daughter proudly declares she has exposed a commoner who tried to steal the precious magic crystal. She orders the execution as Liz kneels, stunned by the injustice. With swords at her neck, Liz despairs, realizing even the wise queen she trusted has turned against her. Before a guillotine, a crowd roars for the criminal's execution. Watching from a carriage, two noble women remark that commoners are never rewarded for their efforts. Facing her doom, Liz realizes she cannot break the cycle of prejudice. Smack! Someone throws bread, striking her in the head. As the crowd jeers, she reflects on the cold reality that birth circumstances create gaps that can't be filled. With tears streaming down her face, she resigns to her fate, having no family to protect. In her final moments before the guillotine, she makes a desperate wish to any god that might be listening. A jolt runs through her as she sees a vision of a girl reaching toward a massive, glowing purple crystal. Waking with a heavy body and strange senses, she finds herself reborn. She looks at her tiny baby hands, confused and struggling to form words. She finds herself in an incredibly lavish and ornate room. As a baby with pink hair and bright green eyes, she takes in her new surroundings. Overwhelmed by her cute new form, she lets out a happy giggle. Her joy fades as she spots a family portrait and recognizes the signature red hair. Her eyes widen in terror as she identifies the red-haired man as Michael, the battlefield demon. Crash! The horrifying realization hits her. She's been reincarnated into the very Tyrant family whose ruin she read about. The story continues. A new chapter begins in the life of the tyrannical family's baby. She recalls her tragic end, executed as a traitor while the crowd cheered for her death. Now a pink-haired baby, Elizabeth sits up with a serious, determined expression. She gazes around the opulent room, stunned by the top-class furnishings of a noble home. Lying in a grand golden crib, she is surrounded by unimaginable luxury. The world looks completely different from her new, tiny perspective. Checking the family portrait again, she confirms her suspicion based on their shared hair color. Bam! Her terrifying realization is confirmed. She has been reborn into the infamous Tyrant family, the Waltzers. She recalls the family members: Michael Waltzer, the demon of the battlefield, his wife Adelina, the femme fatale, and their son. Their son Julius is revealed to be the current chancellor and the first queen's right hand. A dark memory reveals Julius ordering an execution as a queen lies fallen before him. Back in her crib, the baby shivers uncontrollably, overwhelmed by the horrifying knowledge. She tries to console herself, reasoning that since the tyrant couple is dead, the family has likely already fallen from power. Panic sets in as she realizes that despite her cries, no one is coming to care for her. A maid finally opens the door, her face unreadable as she stands silently in the doorway. The brown-haired maid stands over the crib, complaining that it's far too cold for the baby. As the annoyed maid looks on, the baby internally screams in frustration over the awful treatment. On the verge of tears, she laments that she expected to be cared for, but her diaper is still dirty. She fumes that even a disgraced noble family should be able to manage basic care for a baby. Sunlight streams through an ornate window, marking the passage of time. Fed up with the neglect, she decides she has hit her absolute limit. Pat, another maid, gently picks her up and pats her bottom comfortingly. As the maid pats her, she realizes it has been half a day with no food or drink. A baby bottle and a canister of formula sit untouched on a nearby table. A sudden flash of brilliant light emanates from the grand room. A jolt of energy flows through the room, catching her completely by surprise. As she's being held, she spots the first maid returning to the doorway. The maid silently contemplates the container of formula. Elizabeth watches as the maid takes the formula and walks away. The door clicks shut, leaving Elizabeth alone with a startling thought. Sweating with determination, she decides she must test the magical power she just felt. She recalls her previous life as Liz, where her lack of magic forced her to study spells obsessively. The baby tries to cast a simple flame spell, struggling to form the incantation. A massive, glowing purple magic circle erupts around her, its enormous power confirming her connection to the Tyrant family. She raises a tiny hand, feeling the immense magical energy swirling around it. Using her newfound power, she brings the bottle to her lips and happily declares it delicious. She observes that for now, her care is left entirely to the servants. After finishing her bottle, she lies alone in her crib, looking small and dejected. Drifting off to sleep, she resolves that she can manage to survive on her own. The red-haired man, Michael, appears before two maids, who report that there are no issues. The two maids tremble, overwhelmed by his terrifyingly powerful presence. His arrival is announced, identifying the imposing red-haired man as the, quote, demon of the battlefield. Full and content, the baby sleeps peacefully in her crib. The scene transitions, a promotional banner for the series. Warning message displayed. The red-haired man asks two maids if there's been any change, and they report that everything is proceeding smoothly. He looks over his shoulder with a sharp gaze, telling them there is no need for such reports. He decides he should probably check on the baby himself every once in a while. An exterior shot reveals the grand mansion is staffed by a large number of servants. A maid, identified as Servant B, thinks baby care is easy, but Elizabeth internally scoffs at the notion. Another maid muses that Servant B must like babies, but Elizabeth internally panics, realizing this is a misunderstanding. She realizes with dawning horror that each servant thinks someone else is taking care of her. She lies awake and alone in her golden crib, looking tiny in the vast, empty room. She concludes that if it weren't for her own adult mind, she would have already died from neglect. Her eyes snap open as a sudden, sharp jolt of awareness hits her. A chill runs down her spine as she senses a pair of icy eyes watching her from the doorway. The oppressive silence of the grand nursery is broken only by an unseen presence. A few hours later, Elizabeth wonders about the overwhelming presence of a mysterious man who only visits when she's alone. Her eyes snap open to see Michael watching from the doorway, and she panics, unsure of what to do. A few days pass, and a sudden burst of magical energy fills the nursery. Flaunting a pair of sunglasses, Elizabeth expertly uses her magic to enjoy her bottle. As she crawls, a strange, dark aura fills the room, prompting a new line of thought. She tries to greet him with a friendly "How are you?" but only manages to babble incoherently. Frustrated by her failed attempt to communicate, she realizes nothing she intended got through. From the doorway, Michael quietly watches his daughter, a gentle light surrounding him. Peeking over some flowers, Elizabeth flashes an irresistibly cute and happy smile. Her smile vanishes as she stands in her crib, intimidated by her father, Michael, looming over her. His intense gaze is so terrifying that it sends a shiver of fear right through her. A large hand gently pats her head, and she looks up in wide-eyed, innocent surprise. With a faint, almost imperceptible smirk, the red-haired man turns and walks away. As Michael quickly departs, the brown-haired maid enters the room, looking confused by the sudden movement. Elizabeth panics, thinking her secret visitor is about to be discovered. Tisk! The maid angrily grips the crib, her expression full of annoyance. As the maid lunges for her, Elizabeth realizes she can't use her magic and cries out, but a hand suddenly stops the attack. Michael furiously confronts the maid about her intentions, striking her and demanding she answer for her actions as Elizabeth watches. Holding the terrified maid by her collar, Michael's cold glare promises punishment. Standing over the cowering maid in the spilled formula, he menacingly asks if this is how she attends to his daughter. Alone in her crib, Elizabeth watches the tense confrontation from a distance. Michael draws his sword, accusing the maid of filing false reports, and she begs for her life as he prepares to execute her. The red-haired man pauses, his thoughts interrupted by an unexpected sound. Horrified that he might actually kill her, Elizabeth frantically babbles, trying to stop her father. The tense standoff continues, with Michael's sword at the maid's throat as Elizabeth looks on. With tears welling in her big green eyes, she desperately pleads for him to stop. Michael is visibly stunned by his baby daughter's emotional outburst. A dark-haired male servant rushes into the room, snapping to attention and awaiting orders. Now held in her father's arms, Elizabeth lets out a soft coo, finally calling him father in her thoughts. Her brief moment of peace shatters as she realizes, with horror, that the tyrant Michael Walzer is still alive. The truth dawns on her. She hasn't been reborn after the family's fall, but in the past, right before it. Staring at the family portrait, she accepts her terrible fate as a doomed child of the Tyrant family. The scene transitions to a bright, clear day, marking a new beginning. Another maid asks if something is wrong, while Elizabeth processes that the family she once admired is doomed to fall. A new, kind maid named Servant C gives her warm milk, but Elizabeth still feels no peace of mind. While holding Elizabeth, the maid mentions that Lady Adelina will be appointed Chancellor next month. Elizabeth panics, realizing that, according to history, the family falls 1 year after Adelina's appointment, giving her a life expectancy of 1 year. Her eyes burn with determination as she vows that she will not let that future happen. Recalling her tragic execution as Liz, she steels herself, refusing to go through that despair again. With her fist clenched, she embraces her new reality. She is the only one who knows the future. A promotional banner for the Scanlation team is displayed. Warning message displayed. Following the incident, the nursery is shown to have been thoroughly cleaned. In a fresh pink dress, Elizabeth celebrates her newly cleaned and safe environment with a joyous cheer. Bam! A powerful sound effect marks a sudden shift in her mood. Her joyful expression is replaced by one of fierce and adorable determination. Now, her one and only mission is to figure out how a baby can prevent the downfall of the Tyrant family. She reflects that while she studied hard in her past life, she failed at human relationships, a mistake she cannot afford to repeat. Michael's piercing green eyes glint as he silently observes his daughter from the shadows. Staring back at her father, Elizabeth is frozen with fear, thinking his face is truly terrifying. Michael looms over the crib, his powerful aura radiating immense pressure as Elizabeth hesitates. She recalls that it wasn't a tyrant but her father who saved her, letting out a small babble. Elizabeth flashes a brilliant, cute smile, and her father, Michael, is caught off guard by the charming display. Her charm offensive fails as his terrifying aura returns, leaving her to lament her miserable failure. Refusing to be stopped by fear, she mentally resolves to switch tactics and push forward with her plan. To survive, she knows she must turn Tyrant Michael into an ally, even if it means manipulating her own father. A title card appears with a flourish, officially kicking off Operation Daddy-Daughter Bonding. As her first step, Elizabeth wraps herself in a magical shield to withstand her father's overwhelming aura. Recalling moments of his quiet care, she starts to wonder if she has misunderstood his intentions all along. Her suspicion grows as she pictures him holding a cute yellow dress and a pink stuffed bunny for her. She realizes it's his aura that scares everyone away, from babies to animals, much to her frustration. The nearby maid muses that it looks like a normal parent-child chat, while Elizabeth wishes he'd just be gentle. After the maid suggests Elizabeth likes him, Michael furiously yells at the startled servant, while Elizabeth internally begs him to calm down. Elizabeth looks at her father, a flicker of hope and affection appearing in her thoughts. She looks up with wide, pleading eyes, putting on her most innocent and adorable expression. Her father gently offers her a stuffed bunny, a silent peace offering. Hugging the new toy, Elizabeth thinks that at the very least, he seems to be trying. As the maid wonders about bathing and feeding her, Michael gets a dark look of realization, terrifying Elizabeth. With a wild grin, Michael enthusiastically declares that he will be the one to bathe his daughter. The maid nervously tries to explain that a bath isn't necessary thanks to magical cleansing tools. Elizabeth is left utterly speechless and horrified by this unexpected development. Seeing Elizabeth's apparent excitement, a stunned Michael and a resigned maid agree that it's bath time. In the bathroom, Michael holds Elizabeth aloft like a trophy, much to the maid's horror. Well, that's one way to start a bath. The maid bravely scolds him for scaring the baby, and Elizabeth marvels at the maid's courage. Following the maid's instructions, Michael awkwardly adjusts his hold, surprising Elizabeth with the sudden closeness. Snuggled against him, Elizabeth is amazed by how perfectly she fits against his abs, finding them surprisingly comfortable. She marvels at the incredible stability of being held in her father's strong arms. Michael carries his daughter towards the large, sunlit bathtub, ready to begin. Peeking over his shoulder, Elizabeth gets a glimpse of the bath products waiting for her. Seeing the supermint and refreshing and exciting bottles, she panics and internally screams for a servant to save her. Back in her crib, the maid looks on with relief as a traumatized Elizabeth thinks she somehow survived the ordeal. A title card frames the chaotic memory, ironically titled, A Cozy Father-Daughter Bath Time. After the bath, the maid tries to feed Elizabeth, who refuses her milk due to a bloated, uncomfortable tummy. Elizabeth suddenly goes limp with discomfort, and the panicked maid rushes to get help. Feeling a sharp pain, Elizabeth wonders what's happening as she lies helpless in her crib. A brilliant, golden magic circle erupts from Elizabeth, filling the entire room with overwhelming power. Slam Michael bursts through the doorway, shouting his daughter's name in alarm as he sees the blinding light. He rushes to the crib, where he and the maid find the source of the commotion. The magical light has vanished, leaving only a peacefully sleeping Elizabeth in its wake. Michael and the maid watch the sleeping baby, both looking concerned and confused by what just happened. He orders the shaken maid to call a doctor just in case, and she immediately agrees. Alone now, Michael stands watch over his daughter's crib, a silent and protective guardian. In a stunning turn of events, a blue-haired woman wakes up, realizing with a shock that she's back in her old body. A promotional banner for the Scanlation team is displayed. The blue-haired woman, Liz, now sits by the golden crib, watching the sleeping baby Elizabeth inside. Liz leans over the crib, her expression a mix of confusion and concern as she looks at the baby. Wondering why she's back in her old form, Liz gently pokes the baby's forehead, triggering a soft magical glow. Her consciousness returns to her baby body, and Elizabeth wonders how she turned back, letting out a confused babble. With a determined glint in her eyes, baby Elizabeth forces a slight, strained smile. The scene shifts to Liz's blue-haired adult form, floating gracefully near the golden crib. Looking down at her own sleeping infant form, Liz confirms that her baby self is peacefully asleep. A purple magical aura surrounds her hand as Liz realizes her powers are now with this adult form. Pop Liz comically appears from a cloud of smoke, wondering if this explains her sudden materialization. Leaning over the crib, Liz theorizes that if someone touches the sleeping baby, it might trigger a reaction. Bam! Just as predicted, baby Elizabeth wakes with a start, leading Liz to recall that magic can misfire when it builds up. Elizabeth realizes she hasn't used magic recently, which might be the cause of the sudden magical outburst. Her father Michael bursts in, shouting her name, and Elizabeth looks up at him with a happy coo. A reflection in a mirror reveals an elderly doctor and a brown-haired woman accompanying Michael. The elderly doctor looks grave as he anxiously asks about Elizabeth's condition. Michael furiously orders the doctor to hurry the examination, while Elizabeth pities the terrified old man. As Michael comically explodes with a nosebleed from stress, Elizabeth tries to project that she's perfectly fine. While the doctor nervously examines a worried Elizabeth, her father collapses dramatically in the background. The doctor declares Elizabeth to be in good health, but Michael reacts with furious disbelief. Michael angrily confronts the doctor about the maid's report, and Elizabeth fears for the old man's life. To de-escalate the situation, Elizabeth decides to do something embarrassing and musters all her baby strength. Reaching out with her tiny hands, she manages to babble a word toward her father. A close-up shows Elizabeth's blushing, determined face as she tries to get her father's attention. She silently pleads for him to pay attention to her, and his fierce expression softens instantly. Michael gently scoops his daughter up, holding her close to his chest. Held safely in his arms, Elizabeth realizes her stomachache was simply due to an excess of magic. She scrunches her face in concentration, and a powerful pink aura begins to glow around her. With a great strain, she focuses her power. Poof! In a puff of magical smoke, her adult form, Liz, appears once again. Stretching her arms, Liz feels she's finally getting the hang of manifesting this magical body. She approaches a large, ornate mirror to inspect her new form. Touching her cheek, she notices her complexion is healthier, and she seems a bit plumper. A confident smile spreads across her face as she realizes this form gives her more options to save the family. Looking at her simple brown dress, she decides a change of clothes is in order. With a flash of magic, she transforms her dress into a proper black and white maid's uniform. Admiring her reflection, she delights in the fact that her magical body allows for instant costume changes. She pauses, thoughtfully considering her next move. With a final touch, she adjusts her hair into a neat bun, completing her disguise. Peeking from the doorway with a sly grin, she sets off to explore the mansion. Liz happily wanders the grand halls, singing a little song about exploring the noble's mansion. She enjoys a moment of peace, smiling contentedly under a large tree on a bright, sunny day. A promotional banner for the Scanlation team is displayed. Now walking down a long, elegant corridor, Liz notes that she possesses all 5 senses in this form. She continues her survey of the seemingly endless, opulent manor. Mentally exhausted by the sheer size of the place, she slumps to the floor, nicknaming herself Tired Z. Her attention is suddenly caught by a maid carrying a tray on a nearby balcony. Seeing the delicious-looking sandwich and tea, Liz smells the nice scent and correctly guesses it's for her father. Bingo! As a voice from behind a door grants the maid entry, Liz pumps her fist in triumph. Inside the office, Michael is seen hard at work, writing at a desk piled high with documents. As the maid enters and apologizes, Michael's intimidating purple aura flares up, startling her. While biting into a sandwich, Michael commands the terrified maid to report on Elizabeth's condition in detail. He mentally lists the specifics he wants to know, but then dismisses the maid, saying her report won't be necessary. While Liz panics as she magically senses her father is on his way, just as he leaves his office. The maid offers her deepest apologies as Michael's intimidating purple aura flares silently from his desk. Taking a bite of a sandwich, Michael commands a detailed report on Elizabeth, leaving the maid stunned by his intensity. As he mentally lists his concerns, the maid offers to check, but he abruptly dismisses her, saying it won't be necessary as he stands. While Liz panics as she magically senses her father approaching her room. In a frenzy, she desperately wonders what she should do now that he's on his way. Michael steps out of his office, opening the large double doors into the grand hallway. He pauses, sensing magical waves in the air and wondering about their mysterious origin. A cute pink-haired character appears in a whimsical thought bubble, pondering the complex situation. A stark warning flashes, demanding the reader's attention to the proper source before the tale continues. With determined strides, Michael walks down the hallway and firmly grasps the handle to his daughter's door. He enters the room and stands over the golden crib, looking down at the pink-haired baby Elizabeth. Beaming, baby Elizabeth happily introduces herself, her thoughts filled with a joyful image of her mother. A powerful beam of magic erupts from her hand as she loses control. The magical backlash sends Liz flying backward, crashing hard against a wall. She hurtles past her father's blurry figure in the hallway. Tumbling through the air, Liz falls helplessly down the grand hall. Back in her crib, baby Elizabeth sighs with relief, having made it back to her infant body just in time. Michael offers another bath, and Elizabeth is instantly horrified by a flood of traumatic memories from the last one. Wondering why things are getting so busy, Elizabeth recalls her father in his office and questions his role. She looks at him, pondering why he seems to be shouldering all the work by himself. She realizes the mansion has far too few servants, recalling how empty it was when she explored as Liz. Michael gently lifts his daughter from the crib. Holding her close, he quietly asks if she is not afraid of him. Elizabeth babbles, thinking she isn't scared, even as her father asks if she fears the hands that have killed. She smiles, thinking that his actions were necessary and couldn't be helped. A memory flashes of her father as a knight, sword dripping with blood, standing over a fallen enemy. She concludes that if he sacrificed himself for the nation, he wasn't the only one to do so. Michael looks down at the baby in his arms, taken aback and wondering what he's even saying. Elizabeth gazes up at him with wide, innocent eyes, her expression full of trust. She burrows into his chest, snuggling safely against him. The baby looks up at her father's face with a curious and content expression. As the maid smiles in the background, Michael glances at her and dismisses his thoughts. The maid admits she was just thinking he's become quite good at caring for the young lady. A sly smile crosses Elizabeth's face as she thinks to herself that it's a simple task. The maid recalls a time when Michael practiced by holding a cushion, only to crush it with his strength. Michael looks away slightly, responding with a simple, "Very well." Curled up on a pillow, baby Elizabeth drifts off into a peaceful sleep. In her adult form, Liz stands alone, surrounded by ethereal spirits, her expression now serious and determined. Liz worries her plans will fail if her father is too busy, jeopardizing their future. But then a new thought strikes her. Bathed in a radiant light, she has a brilliant idea. Now in her maid uniform, Liz considers how odd it is for the Knight Commander to be stationed at home full-time. She clenches her fist, complaining that if it were her, she could finish all that paperwork in a flash. She walks purposefully down the long, empty hall, a new plan forming. She stops abruptly, realizing with a jolt that she is right here and able to help. A hand elegantly holds a quill, poised to begin writing on a blank document. Disguised as a maid, Liz sits at the desk and diligently completes the paperwork so her father only needs to sign. Her imagination conjures a sparkly, grateful Michael, who thinks her help is super useful. The real Michael returns to his office, looking at the completed paperwork with a deeply puzzled expression. He sits at his desk by the warm fire, continuing to study the mysterious, finished document. Peeking through a window, Liz believes her plan will grant her more quality time with her father. Seen through the window pane, Liz smiles with satisfaction, confident in her scheme. In a quiet room, a young, red-haired man looks down with a pensive expression, thinking he has to come up with a plan. In a state of pure bliss, baby Elizabeth rests peacefully on her father's chest as he sleeps. Snuggled warmly against her father, Elizabeth sighs contentedly, thinking it feels incredibly good. Looking up with a knowing smile, Elizabeth credits her comfort to her magic and memories from her past life. Elizabeth imagines her father's overwhelming presence intimidating two maids, thinking it's more than just magic. While Michael holds his sleeping daughter, he resolves to increase the knight's training, while Elizabeth mentally cheers them on. Michael asks his daughter if she's met him yet, and a confused Elizabeth babbles, wondering who he means. Wah! A sudden realization strikes Elizabeth. Engrossed with her father, she completely forgot about the other survivor of their distant family. A title card dramatically introduces the ruthless Julius Waltzer, a red-haired young man, as Elizabeth thrashes in panic. A purple-haired mascot character for the Scanlation team appears in a thought bubble. A promotional banner is displayed, hiring for translation and editing positions. A stark yellow warning is shown, directing readers to the official website. A group of nobles whispers as the young, red-haired Julius Waltzer walks past them down a hall. A black-haired aide informs Julius that His Excellency will not be attending sword training, causing Julius to flinch. Julius turns to his aide and asks what happened, but the man hesitates to give a reason. A close-up shows Julius's wide, golden eyes, his expression one of utter shock. Being fed a bottle, Elizabeth realizes her father is so obsessed with her that he has forgotten all about Julius. Or, she considers, perhaps her father's intimidating presence simply scares everyone else away. Elizabeth envisions a future where Julius Waltzer, the future chancellor, helps her father with his mountain of work. Held securely, Elizabeth looks on with a determined, sparkling gaze, her new plan taking shape. She recalls that Julius, once the first princess's right hand, always wore a doll-like expression. She remembers the popular rumor that he was handsome and only ever responded to Lady Claudia, the savior queen. A past life memory shows Liz watching as Julius stands, with his entourage of followers. She recalls his ice-cold gaze as he dismissed her, a mere civil official, for having a small presence. Kneeling before other officials, a young Julius laments the state of the royal court. Liz clenches her fist in frustration, thinking back on how he'd call her a commoner and concluding he was an awful person. Baby Elizabeth thrashes about in her crib, annoyed by the memory of Julius. She ponders if the only thing Julius and her father have in common is their red hair. In a flashback, Liz remembers secretly memorizing noble profiles at the palace, though it led to her being bullied. Elizabeth recalls that Julius entered the palace at age 12, a fact she now realizes is far too young. With a determined glint in her eye, she concludes there must be a serious reason for him to have started so early. She remembers that it was her father who insisted on starting weekly sword lessons for Julius. Hearing that his lesson is rescheduled for baby Elizabeth, Julius clenches his fist in disbelief, finding the notion impossible. "Impossible," he yells, ordering his carriage prepared and storming off to the Waltzer estate. Outside in the garden, Michael asks the maid if getting sunlight is all right, and she confirms it's important, while a happy Elizabeth looks on. Michael's attention is caught by a carriage approaching the estate gates, and he wonders who the visitor could be. He notes that he wasn't expecting any visitors today, while Elizabeth looks on with a puzzled expression. The maid offers to investigate the arrival, but Michael declines, stating that the carriage is already heading their way. A frantic Julius leaps from the carriage shouting "Father," which startles Elizabeth and makes her flinch. Suddenly bursting into tears, Elizabeth panics, realizing she's just a baby and can't control her startled reaction. The maid rushes away in a fluster. Michael holds his crying daughter as a frustrated Julius clutches his head, vexed by the situation. The tense standoff continues as Michael comforts Elizabeth, with the maid and a distraught Julius watching. Julius nervously stammers, trying to address his father. Michael coldly orders Julius to go back, leaving the young man looking shocked and hurt. As Julius turns to leave, a wide-eyed Elizabeth looks from her father's arms, finally realizing this is him. Elizabeth tugs on her father's shirt, and when the maid asks what's wrong, she thinks about wanting a nap in her room. Michael hands Elizabeth over to the maid, who understands and accepts the baby. Watching Julius leave, Elizabeth notes his hurt expression, believing her father doesn't actually hate him. Held in her father's arms, baby Elizabeth closes her eyes and smiles with serene contentment. The scene shifts to a quiet, sunlit garden with an ornate fountain, signaling a moment of calm. Dejected, Julius sits huddled alone against a wall, his posture radiating sadness and defeat. A tear rolls down Julius's cheek as he looks down, his golden eyes filled with sorrow. Disguised as a maid, Liz approaches Julius with a gentle and reassuring smile, surrounded by ethereal white roses. With a kind expression, the blue-haired maid asks Julius if he is all right. Startled and teary-eyed, Julius looks up defensively and demands to know who is there. Julius furiously denies crying, claiming something was in his eye, while Liz internally gushes over how adorable he is. Liz finds it hard to believe this beautiful boy will become such a cold person, lamenting what a shame it is. A blushing Julius looks up in alarm, realizing the maid has been watching him cry. The two sit quietly side by side in a field of daisies, a moment of peace settling between them. They continue to sit together in the serene garden, the silence stretching on. Leaning in close, Liz suddenly proposes they make a plan, startling a confused Julius. Liz cheerfully announces her grand idea, the super operation, best buddies parent and child, leaving Julius utterly stunned. A brief interlude passes before the story continues. Another short pause builds anticipation for the next scene. Now sitting back to back with their arms crossed, Liz and Julius both look equally annoyed. Liz insists they lay out a plan, but Julius questions why she is being so sudden. Liz excitedly dubs her plan the Super BFF parent and child operation, much to Julius's continued bewilderment. Julius looks at her incredulously, questioning the ridiculous name she came up with. Pointing her finger, Liz retorts by asking if he's even an adult. Her question catches Liz off guard, causing her to blush and stammer in response. Liz snaps, calling Julius out for acting tough after crying, thinking he's a spoiled and uncute tyrant. Julius calmly asks her to explain her plan, and after a moment's hesitation, Liz agrees to elaborate. As Julius smirks, Liz internally fumes at his insolent tone, concluding that a tyrant's son is truly a tyrant. Julius notices Liz's strained expression and asks what's wrong, but she's too busy fighting her frustration. Liz clutches her head, internally screaming that he is still being incredibly insolent. The scene shows Michael and Julius in separate, silent moments of deep, unspoken thought. At a tense dinner, Elizabeth sits in her high chair and finds the suffocating atmosphere unbearable. Julius formally informs his father that he will be returning to the academy the following day. Michael barely acknowledges him, simply replying, "I see," before taking another bite of his meal. Julius adds that he won the sword-fighting tournament, but his father's response is the same cold dismissal. A wide-eyed Elizabeth looks on, her expression a mixture of shock and concern at the cold interaction. Liz realizes her praise means nothing, just as a distraught Elizabeth begins to wail. Julius makes a final attempt to connect, asking his father to go deer hunting with him. As Michael turns away, Elizabeth panics, thinking the servants can care for her just fine. In a burst of defiance, Julius declares he will hunt the deer by himself. Holding a sleeping Elizabeth, Michael coolly tells Julius that his efforts will not be necessary. Tucked in bed, Elizabeth fumes in frustration, wondering why her father gives her nothing to work with. The next phase is revealed as Operation 3, but Julius throws a tantrum, refusing to act childlike to get attention. Liz tries to convince Julius to try, but then remembers the harsh reality of the House of Walzer. Her eyes harden with resolve as she thinks that in this house, indulgence is not permitted. Liz reflects that her father is the tyrant head of a tyrant household, making a normal bond impossible. Realizing a normal family life is too much to hope for, Liz sadly apologizes to a distant Julius. Julius walks away, resolving not to be swayed by the maid and dismissing his father's affection as a whim. He clenches his fist, determined to earn his father's acknowledgement through hard work and real results. Gazing at a grand hall, Julius vows to achieve more and grow strong like his father. He grips his sword with bruised hands, ready to forge his own path, to earn his father's respect. Just as he stills his resolve, Liz's voice cuts in, suggesting a pick-me-up and hug-me operation, startling him. Annoyed, the blue-haired maid insists she has other plans too, as Julius looks on. Julius bluntly calls her a strange one, causing the maid to blush in utter shock. The maid internally fumes, thinking he is incredibly cheeky for calling her strange. Blushing with a shy smile, Julius thinks this is much better than seeing him cry. The maid watches him, smiling to herself as she concludes seeing him happy is better. A promotional banner for the Scanlation team is displayed as Julius walks away down a grand hallway. Walking with steely determination, Julius thinks the time has finally come to use that. He recalls honing a special technique with his academy instructors, confident he can unleash it at any time. As a stream of purple magic flows toward the sleeping baby Elizabeth, Julius prepares to use his special technique. Julius leans over the crib, happy to find Elizabeth awake, and covers his face to play peekaboo, baffling the baby. He pops up with a cheerful boo, delighting Elizabeth, who bursts into a happy laugh. As Julius plays with a happy Elizabeth, their father, Michael, appears in the doorway and ominously asks what is happening. Michael menacingly grabs Julius's shoulder, his expression furious as he demands to know what he's doing. Julius nervously explains it is a trick his teachers at the academy taught him to make babies laugh. Michael silently observes his son before covering his own face to play peekaboo, making Elizabeth gasp in anticipation. With a thunderous boo, Michael unleashes a wave of energy so powerful it sends both Julius and Elizabeth flying. As they tumble backward, Julius spots a flying pink bunny toy and shouts for Elizabeth to watch out. In a desperate dive, Julius manages to catch Elizabeth mid-air just before she hits the ground. Clutching Elizabeth, Julius feels relief, while Elizabeth internally panics about her near-death experience. Julius then apologizes to his father. Julius tries to take the blame, but Elizabeth thinks it's not his fault, as the move is only dangerous when their father does it. Michael places a hand on his son's shoulder, and a tearful Julius looks up at him. Michael instructs Julius that he must protect his sister, and a determined Julius eagerly agrees. As Julius lovingly holds his little sister, Elizabeth gazes up at him with a bright, happy smile. A blushing Julius is struck by an arrow of affection as he holds the sleeping baby Elizabeth close. A thought bubble declares that despite the unforeseen chaos, the mission was a smashing success. The maid tells a flustered Julius not to worry about the details, adding that they also grew closer. She cheerfully suggests he drop his plans to move to the palace, since they are already bonding at the manor. Julius turns away, looking troubled and deep in thought after her suggestion. Julius confronts the maid, demanding to know how she knew about his palace invitation when he hasn't even told his father. He recalls her suspicious behavior from the start, as she struggles to come up with an excuse. His eyes widen in sudden realization, and he accuses her of being a spy. Panicked, the maid vehemently denies the accusation, realizing she has made a huge mistake. She is internally shocked, unable to believe Julius kept his palace invitation a secret from their father. In a moment of sheer panic, the maid blurts out her true identity. "I'm Elizabeth." Julius stares back at her, completely speechless and bewildered by her impossible claim. A promotional banner is displayed, hiring for translation and editing positions. Julius shouts, "Elizabeth," in a state of utter disbelief and confusion. The maid stands awkwardly before a still confused Julius after her startling confession. Julius is still processing her words, only managing a confused "huh" as he stares at her. Liz clutches her head, panicking about what she just said, as Julius asks what she's talking about. Julius sighs, asking her to clarify what she means by claiming to be Elizabeth. Liz laughs nervously, trying to play it off as a joke she doesn't remember making. Julius threatens to report her as an intruder, prompting a desperate Liz to grab him and plead for a chance to explain. Liz looks down, realizing that even if she explains the truth, he probably won't believe her anyway. Julius grabs her chin and furiously demands an explanation, causing her to yelp in fear. Julius challenges her to prove her claim right there, and looking at the sleeping baby, Liz confidently says she can. Liz decides it will be faster to show him rather than explain, trusting that he is kind enough to listen. As the maid leans over the crib, a shocked Julius shouts at her to stop. "What are you going to do to Elizabeth?" Julius cries out as a brilliant light envelops the two of them. A close-up shows baby Elizabeth peeking over the side of her crib with a bright, knowing smile. Baby Elizabeth babbles that she's right here, leaving a confused Julius wondering what just happened. As Julius leans in, the baby insists that Liz is Elizabeth, prompting him to question her name. A chibi Julius asks if she can change back into her previous form, and a smiling Elizabeth happily obliges. Whoa! Julius watches in shock as the blue-haired maid Liz emerges from a bright light above the crib. With the transformation complete, baby Elizabeth now lies sleeping peacefully in her crib. Liz explains that her body is made from Elizabeth's magic and asks Julius if he understands now. Liz internally notes his bossy tone, remembering that Julius was just like this in her past life. In a flashback, a stern, older Julius forces a weary Liz to work through the night over paperwork. Julius agrees to listen to her story, and Liz prepares to tell him, though she warns it's a long one. The two stand together as Liz begins to explain the unbelievable truth. Liz continues her explanation, gesturing forward as she recounts the events of her past life. Julius quickly grasps the concept of her having memories from a future life, impressing Liz with his sharp intellect. Liz cheerfully praises her genius big brother, confirming he is correct and acknowledging his reputation as an academy prodigy. Julius recalls an ancient text about a wizard who foresaw the future and created a duplicate body, theorizing that they too were reborn from a future life. Liz internally acknowledges there's a secret about Julius she can't tell him, recalling a discovery from the archives. In her past life, she found a document marked for disposal, revealing that Tyrant Michael once entered the demon forest alone. A flashback shows Michael surrounded by countless magic beasts, abandoned with no hope of reinforcements. When his strength gave out, the only thing he managed to secure was a magic crystal, fated to become a national treasure. He offered this crystal to the royal family, an achievement that single-handedly allowed Julius, a child of a fallen house, to become chancellor. Back in the present, a smiling Julius looks at Liz, now understanding her situation. Determined to protect him, Liz internally vows she can't reveal the truth about their father's sacrifice. Julius looks on, slightly surprised by her sudden emotional shift. A determined Julius thinks that making choices to strengthen his father is all that matters, as Liz watches with concern. Julius smiles, content with his new resolve to support his father no matter what. Liz feels a sense of hope, believing that with her brother now on her side, the tragic future she remembers can be avoided. She recalls the terrible vision of Michael fighting alone against a horde of magical beasts. Liz believes that even if something bad happens, everything will be fine as long as Julius stands by their father's side. Startled, Liz and Julius both turn their attention toward a portrait hanging on the wall. A different maid enters the room, and Julius turns toward the sound of her arrival, asking her to excuse them. Lying in her crib once more, baby Elizabeth looks up and thinks, "Boo?" Julius urgently tells Liz that boo is not an answer, and that their father is waiting for them. As Julius tends to the crib, Liz internally agrees, ready to face their father. Suddenly, their father Michael appears, remarking on Julius's deep concern for Elizabeth. Michael silently picks up the sleeping baby Elizabeth from her crib. Elizabeth peeks open an eye, relieved that her father doesn't seem to have noticed her secret. Julius watches with a relieved smile, thinking that, thank goodness, they got away with it. Michael stands holding Elizabeth, looking expectantly at his son Julius. Michael commands Julius to accompany them, and a smiling Julius immediately agrees. Tucked in her crib, Elizabeth is relieved, thinking that her brother can finally talk to their father normally now. A maid approaches with a bottle, internally trembling at how scary Michael's aura is. As she drinks her milk, Elizabeth thinks about how easily she can now enter her dream world. The sweet baby Elizabeth looks up contentedly. A warning message is displayed regarding the Scanlation website. In his study, Michael works at a desk piled high with papers as Julius stands beside him. Liz's plan, Operation Bonding with Father, is to help with work, and Julius thoughtfully considers the idea. Michael remarks that it's more efficient to use the knights for their strength than their minds, while Julius agrees they've reduced the nearby magic beasts. Julius clarifies that the knight's duty is a separate matter from his own responsibilities. Achibi Julius cheerfully thinks that taking a little break shouldn't be a problem. Julius's expression turns serious, as he adds they can only rest until next month's inauguration. In his study, Michael thinks about next month's inauguration ceremony, where a woman named Adelina Valtizer is set to be named. As Michael considers that Adelina will become the new chancellor, a maid bursts in to interrupt them. The flustered maid urgently tries to tell them something is wrong with the young lady, catching both Michael and Julius's attention. In her crib, a thoughtful baby Elizabeth considers the royal palace. Lying with her bunny toy, Elizabeth continues her thought, stating that, honestly, she doesn't want to go. Elizabeth recalls the terrifying face of First Queen Claudia, the one who killed her, and trembles in fear. A flashback introduces Lady Adelina, a brilliant woman who rose to prominence based on talent, not status. Adelina was a woman of firm justice who never tolerated corruption among the nobles. Her principled actions and the people who admired her meant something significant for her future. It meant she was despised by the nobility, as she had purged nearly all corrupt high-ranking officials. Elizabeth recalls that though Lady Adelina was called an evil woman, it was thanks to her that she, an orphan, could survive. Back in the present, the maid explains to a concerned Michael and Julius that the young lady has been like this all morning. A chorus of butterflies surrounds baby Elizabeth as she happily sings, causing Julius to wonder if she's really singing. Struck by a bolt of realization, a shocked Michael shouts, "No way! Is Elizabeth a genius?" Whap! Michael swiftly scoops up the baby, who is now peacefully held in his arms as her toy tumbles through the air. The next month, as Michael leaves the room, a determined maid clenches her fist, ready for their trip to the royal palace. The family stands together in their formal attire, ready for their visit to the palace. A blushing Elizabeth, held by her father, is completely starstruck by his impressive knight uniform. A magnificent royal carriage, pulled by 4 white horses, begins its journey. Inside the carriage, Michael warns Julius to be careful at the palace, while Elizabeth notes the magical contracts mean even new servants are trustworthy. Elizabeth reflects that the real issue was never about working, recalling a vision of her alternate self, Liz, imprisoned. A line of opulent carriages makes its way toward the grand royal palace. A pristine white boot steps firmly onto a red carpet, marking their arrival. The family, accompanied by a new maid, disembarks from their carriage. A close-up reveals Elizabeth's worried expression as she thinks, "Still?" The palace feels nostalgic, but Elizabeth still trembles with fear as her father carries her. Michael asks if she needs a diaper, but an indignant Elizabeth shouts, "No!" A palace attendant leads the family down a corridor, announcing that Lady Adelina Valtzer's office is this way. Looking back down the hall, Elizabeth realizes she never visited this area in her life as Liz. Michael calls out to Adelina, who turns and is surprised to see him holding a thing. As the blue-haired woman holds a bundle, Elizabeth immediately notices the dark circles under her eyes. Elizabeth's internal monologue continues, observing Adelina's haggard face and lifeless hair with concern. A teary-eyed Elizabeth recognizes Adelina as a typical overworked person, just like she was in her past life. Michael advises the woman she should rest, and Elizabeth thinks even a tyrant like her father would show concern. Adelina dismisses his concern with a smile, while Elizabeth is shocked to hear her think that Michael is a muscle monster with inhuman stamina. Julius addresses the woman as mother, urging her not to push herself, and she gratefully thanks him. As her mother reviews a document, Elizabeth realizes this is not what she imagined at all. Elizabeth wonders if false rumors were spread about her mother. But more importantly, there's another pressing question. With a cold expression, Adelina asks Michael why he brought that to her office. Michael calmly explains he's been caring for the baby, prompting a shocked reaction from Adelina. Julius defends his sister, but his mother angrily declares that's exactly why he shouldn't bring Elizabeth near her, leaving Michael speechless. Elizabeth recalls her efforts to bond with her father and brother, all to protect her family. A tearful Elizabeth is heartbroken that after everything she's done, she is hated by her own mother. She despairs that her mother despises her so much she refuses to even say her name as Adelina glares down with contempt. A promotional banner is displayed, hiring for translation and editing positions. A furious Adelina screams for them to take that thing away from her immediately. Julius looks on in utter shock, murmuring, "Mother," as Michael watches grimly. Crushed, Elizabeth realizes she is truly hated by her mother, who won't even speak her name. Michael looks down, his expression somber and filled with unspoken sorrow. Michael hands Elizabeth to the maid, explaining he must attend to the knight's order before the ceremony begins. As Michael and Julius turn to leave, a wide-eyed Elizabeth panics, wondering if they are truly abandoning her. A furious Adelina stops them, demanding they take the child with them, a command Elizabeth silently cheers for. Michael turns back, his expression unreadable, as the family is brought back together at the office doorway. With Elizabeth now in a nearby basket, an exhausted Adelina slumps over her desk, prompting Liz to think her mother is the one who truly deserves to weep. Elizabeth has a sudden realization that Adelina's own mother must despise her, just as Adelina coldly orders the maid not to move the baby's basket. The maid meekly agrees, appalled that Adelina treats her own child like an inconvenient object. Surveying the office, Elizabeth's eyes land on a mysterious, glowing object resting on a stack of papers. As a different maid leaves to get tea, Elizabeth sees her chance, thinking, "It's my time," and reaching for the strange item. From her basket, Elizabeth's tiny hand emits a powerful blue glow as she uses her magic. A brilliant purple light shoots from the object directly into a shocked Elizabeth's mind. The light fades, revealing a patterned cloth that Adelina now holds, confusedly wondering what it is. Adelina silently picks up Elizabeth's basket and carries her out of the room. The returning maid watches them leave, wondering what just happened. A vision reveals a flower being mixed into tea, a simple process with a hidden purpose. In a flashback, a cloaked figure masterminds a plot to infiltrate the Walzer household by threatening the new maid about her daughter. Elizabeth recalls from her past life's research that a small dose of the flower is medicinal. However, she also remembers the terrifying truth. A large dose transforms the flower into a deadly poison. Back in the present, Elizabeth watches her mother from the basket, worriedly wondering if the poisoning is happening now. The nervous new maid enters the room, announcing she has brought the tea. As Adelina absent-mindedly tells the maid where to set the tea, Elizabeth eyes the newcomer with growing suspicion. Elizabeth observes the maid's sickly complexion, hidden beneath a tense smile. A horrifying thought strikes Elizabeth as she realizes the vision she saw might have been a memory of something that already occurred. She tries to dismiss it as a dream, but can't shake the feeling of dread as she watches her mother. As Adelina raises the teacup to her lips, she calmly wonders if there's a poisonous flower in the tea, while Elizabeth watches in horror. With grim resolve, Elizabeth closes her eyes, deciding to use a clone to intervene. An attendant interrupts, announcing it is time to change clothes, surprising a distracted Adelina. Elizabeth's suspicious gaze on the maid is broken by the sight of an unknown man's formal shoes. A blonde-haired man in a fine suit is now carrying her basket, with the nervous maid following behind. The blonde man swiftly reaches out to take the basket. He firmly takes the basket, leaving the maid watching helplessly. The maid makes a desperate attempt to grab the basket back from him. The blonde man calmly begins to speak, explaining his reasoning. He reveals his simple yet chilling purpose, serving some tea. The maid's face contorts in absolute terror at his words. She stammers that she has already served the tea, as Elizabeth listens from the basket. Elizabeth's eyes widen slightly as she processes the maid's terrified confession. As a sinister aura surrounds them, the man coolly asks, "Is that so?" The man's eyes glow menacingly as he gives the maid a chilling order to take some rest. A cruel, knowing smile spreads across his lips. A dark energy strikes the maid, and a bright red splash of blood appears on her white apron. She holds the basket, stunned and wounded by the sudden, invisible attack. Blood spills from the maid's mouth as her eyes widen in shock and pain. Elizabeth stares from her basket in abject terror, realizing the true nature of this man. The blond man gazes down with a cold, ruthless expression as a horrifying thought begins to form in Elizabeth's mind. Elsewhere, Michael and Julius walk together down a long, ornate palace hallway. Julius hesitantly calls out to his father, trying to bring up the subject of Elizabeth. Michael turns to his son and acknowledges him with a simple, "Yeah." As they continue to walk, Michael seems to question a phrase Julius just used about having come to terms. The scene is violently cut short by a sudden splash of blood and a shocked, questioning gaze. A strange sensation overcomes Michael, who grimly decides they must return as Julius looks on in confusion. A promotional page advertises job openings for translators, proofreaders, and editors for the series. In a shocking flashback, a blond man stands over a bleeding maid, holding a basket containing a terrified Elizabeth. A disembodied voice screams in confusion as the blond man coldly looks down, dismissing the fallen woman as foolish. The blond man's expression remains calm and detached, hinting at his cold nature. The bleeding maid weakly reaches for the man's leg, trying to protect her lady. As the maid clings to his leg, a young boy with light brown hair looks on with rage, shouting at the man. With a brutal kick, the man sends the maid flying and calmly walks away from the scene. Terrified from within her basket, Elizabeth silently pleads for the horrific scene to stop. Wah! Her silent plea turns into a terrified internal scream. Suddenly, a flash of blue light erupts as someone intervenes with blinding speed. As Elizabeth's basket tumbles through the air, a hand reaches out to save her. The basket lands safely in the arms of the loyal maid, who catches her just in time. A glowing blue light emanates from Michael's leg as Julius rushes to his side. As Julius questions the brilliant light, Michael realizes his suspicions were correct. The blond man lies defeated on the floor as the pink-haired baby peeks from her basket, now safely with her maid. Her eyes wide with horror, Elizabeth's mind is consumed by the sight of so much blood. A voice, presumably Michael's, orders Julius to take Elizabeth to safety. Julius takes Elizabeth while Michael kneels beside the fallen attacker, his expression hardening with cold fury. The defeated attacker wonders if he was poisoned, while Michael speculates that suicide is a strong possibility. Holding his baby sister, Julius speaks her name with gentle concern. Michael then takes a quiet Elizabeth from his son's arms. Hic! A small hiccup escapes Elizabeth as tears well in her eyes. Her green eyes filled with tears, Elizabeth begins to cry. Wah! The delayed shock finally hits, and Elizabeth lets out a heart-wrenching wail. At that moment, as Julius holds his crying sister, he looks down with a soft, understanding gaze. He recalls being too young to fully comprehend the terrifying event unfolding before him. He remembers feeling helpless and scared as knights tended to the attacker on the floor. All he could do was cry, just like his baby sister wailing in their father's arms. After the ordeal, Michael holds his daughter, who now sleeps peacefully in her basket. Julius connects the strange feeling from the mansion to this memory, recalling how his father simply noted that Elizabeth had cried. He thinks with concern that it's the first time he's ever seen her cry so hard. Just as Michael worries about how scared Elizabeth must have been, a guard rushes in to report that Lady Adelina is safe. Michael calmly accepts the news, while in the background, a man announces that the attacker's bleeding has stopped. A guard reveals a single pink flower, explaining it was found on the woman. Michael's eyes glow with a menacing green light as he glares with silent, cold fury. Michael decides to keep the flower as a man named Roger calls out to him. As his father deals with the aftermath, Julius quietly calls out to him. Michael turns and firmly orders more guards to be assigned to Adelina. Julius smiles, relieved that he can now return to the academy with peace of mind. His expression darkens as Michael begins to issue a chilling warning. You will regret making an enemy of the Walter family, he vows, his sinister glare a stark contrast to Julius's innocent smile. When she finally awakens, the memory of that day fades. Elizabeth recalls her mother Adelina's appointment ceremony, which has now concluded. Adelina smiles radiantly in an elegant gown, celebrated by the applauding crowd. Adelina senses Elizabeth is awake, while Julius notices his father's attention has shifted. Michael gently tells a squirming Elizabeth to calm down, and she immediately settles with a happy look. He pulls her into a warm embrace and she snuggles against him, feeling safe and content. As the family stands together, they are watched by the attendees of the ceremony. When guests gossip about the battlefield demon doting on his daughter, Michael silences them with a single, terrifying glare, causing them to shrink back in fear. As Michael holds Elizabeth in the background, a somber Adelina resolves that now is not the time to be scared. Clutching her father's clothes, a nervous Elizabeth sweats, her eyes wide with lingering fear. A promotional banner is displayed, advertising the series and hiring staff. The wounded brown-haired maid sleeps peacefully in a lavish bed before her eyes slowly flutter open. Now fully awake, the maid sits up in bed, looking around the unfamiliar room. Two men stand by her bedside, one asking if she's awake, while the other wonders if she's alive. GHK, the maid gasps in panic, jolting upright and desperately trying to call for help for her ladyship. A brown-haired man gently restrains her, assuring her that the commander's daughter is safe, leaving the maid to stammer in confusion. Overwhelmed with emotion, the maid weeps with relief, overjoyed that Elizabeth is safe. Now wearing glasses, the maid rests peacefully as the two men continue to watch over her. Holding a cloth with a flower design, Michael reports they found nothing at the palace and questions the motive of the maid. Michael praises the man he's speaking to, who internally notes the maid's claim about putting something in the tea. With a slight smile, Elizabeth realizes the maid's confession about the poison was a lie. Elizabeth stands alone in her frilly dress, looking thoughtful. Michael holds a sleeping Elizabeth, relieved she's alive and contemplating a review of the magical contracts on their servants. A worried Julius asks his father about the fate of the intruder. Snuggling against her father, Elizabeth thinks she's glad everything worked out, but her relief is short-lived as she senses something is wrong. In a tense flashback, a furious Adelina shouts, questioning why Elizabeth was brought to her office. Julius tries to calm his mother as he holds a crying Elizabeth, but Adelina angrily questions how she could possibly be calm. A hand reaches for Elizabeth, taking her from a shocked Julius, who notes the person apparently dislikes him. A montage shows Michael taking Elizabeth from Julius and later feeding her a bottle with a gentle expression. Adelina stares ahead with a cold, unyielding gaze, her arms crossed defiantly. As the family stands together, a ghostly figure reveals that it was they who orchestrated the recent events. The figure is revealed to be a blonde woman, Queen Claudia, as a horrifying vision shows someone being executed by guillotine. Elizabeth clutches her bottle in terror, her mind flashing back to Adelina's menacing eye. Queen Claudia appears, and a shocked Elizabeth realizes she hasn't changed at all. Elizabeth calms herself, remembering that she is now Elizabeth, not Liz, as she finds comfort in her father's arms. Queen Claudia greets Adelina as the first queen and asks if she is ready for the evening ball. With a concerned expression, the queen explains she rushed over as soon as she heard about the incident. Adelina remains silent and composed as the queen continues to speak. The queen's gaze falls upon the family as she mentions hearing a servant tried to kidnap the commander's daughter. Waving her fan, Adelina coolly dismisses the queen's concern, noting that the guest rooms are the second queen's responsibility. Queen Claudia hides a sly smile behind her fan, seemingly pleased by Adelina's words. She continues to smile, sensing a powerful presence in the room. A mysterious, glowing figure bows deeply before Michael and Elizabeth. Elizabeth feels a distinctly strange and unsettling vibe emanating from the first queen. Adelina sighs, then coldly tells the queen that as a friend, she should understand her only concern is for the Vulture heir. Peeking from behind her father, Elizabeth watches the tense exchange between her mother and the queen. Michael and Julius watch the interaction with expressions of unease and concern. Queen Claudia maintains her sweet, unreadable smile from behind her fan. The intense gazes of Adelina and Queen Claudia meet in a silent, icy standoff. Elizabeth wonders if the bad vibe from Queen Claudia has vanished, just as the Queen begins to speak. Queen Claudia now stands beside a dark-haired man in a formal suit. Adelina formally thanks the Queen for her help, while internally lamenting that her own mother despises her. Elizabeth feels a pang of disappointment, believing her mother has just pushed the first queen away. Peeking from her father's cloak, Elizabeth silently objects with a determined number. In a flashback, a different blonde queen in a striking red gown stands with her 2 maids and a young girl. The queen in red gives an order to one of her maids, who bows her head and agrees to make the arrangements. The queen gently adjusts the hair of the young girl standing before her. The queen's eye reflects Michael holding Elizabeth, hinting at a deeper connection or observation. The blonde queen in the red dress calmly orders her dark-haired maid to send a message to the head court mage. In a chilling internal monologue, the queen decides she will tell Liz about the special present she has prepared for her. Want to work for the best in the business? We are looking for talented individuals to join our team. Do you have what it takes? Visit our website to apply. Elizabeth lies alone on her back in the center of a large, ornate blue rug. With grunts of effort, Elizabeth struggles and finally manages to roll over onto her stomach. She celebrates her newfound ability to roll over easily and realizes she has more physical control, reaching out with a tiny hand. Triumphantly holding her bottle by herself for the first time, Elizabeth is amazed by how fast she's growing up. Her thoughts flash back to the glowing, patterned cloth she saw in her mother's office. As she drinks from her bottle, Elizabeth has a stunning realization. The vision she saw was a glimpse of the future. A brown-haired maid pushes Elizabeth in an elegant golden carriage through a beautiful, sunlit garden. The maid tearfully tells Elizabeth how glad she is that she's safe and how grateful she is to those who saved her. Elizabeth recalls that her father made a special exception to permit healing magic to be used on the injured maid. She remembers the maid being praised for her bravery, but still feels a sense of unease about the incident. The brown-haired maid gives Elizabeth a warm and gentle smile. Elizabeth's eyes widen with sudden, sparkling realization. She thinks back to her Operation Get Along with Dad, looking pleased with herself. Julius suddenly appears in formal attire, surprising Elizabeth and the maid. Julius enters his father's study, explaining he was summoned, as Michael sits at his desk stamping a document. Michael looks up from his work with a serious expression, his task complete. Michael informs a determined-looking Julius that his swordsmanship instruction will resume the following day. Julius agrees to return to the academy, but his expression turns sad as he watches a maid carrying Elizabeth in the hall. Michael tells his son that Adelina must have her own reasons for her current behavior. With a heavy heart, Julius lowers his head and says that he understands. His gaze softens as he watches his smiling baby sister, a wistful look in his eyes. Michael watches his children leave, reflecting that Adelina managed her trauma during Julius's childhood, but is struggling now with Elizabeth. He sadly recalls a blue-haired woman named Nausea, wondering if even she should keep her distance from Adelina for now. As Julius and the maid depart with Elizabeth, Michael turns back to his desk and begins to write. An attendant announces the arrival of a messenger from the royal palace, and Michael agrees to receive him. Elizabeth's eyes sparkle with intense curiosity at the news. Now being held by Julius, Elizabeth wonders if the messenger brings news about the attack on her mother. Elizabeth's curiosity grows, and she looks on with an eager expression. Julius glances down at her and gently asks her to be still for now, while Elizabeth lets out a cry of terror as the menacing green-eyed face of a demon-like figure looms over her. Julius excuses himself and carries a babbling Elizabeth away as his father watches them go. In another room, Michael meets with 2 men, including the blonde man from the previous incident, and sternly asks for their report. Julius watches over Elizabeth as she sleeps soundly in her cradle. Poof! A blue-haired maid suddenly appears in a swirl of magic, startling Julius. Julius questions the blue-haired maid, who admits she wanted to hear what his father and the others were discussing. The maid looks at him pointedly, asking with a sharp gaze if he is unable to foresee such things. Julius somberly reflects that the future he knows is limited, coming only from the memories of Liz the commoner. The maid assures a dejected Julius that she's not blaming him, but results are what matter, prompting him to apologize. Julius leans sorrowfully on the railing of a balcony, looking downcast. He resolves to intensify his sword practice, a decision that seems to confuse the watching maid. The maid thinks to herself that while he excels at everything else, swordsmanship is the one thing Julius struggles with at the academy. Filled with grim resolve, Julius vows to try harder so he can become strong enough to protect everyone. The blue-haired maid makes an impassioned plea, asking Julius to take her to the academy with him. Glowing with earnest determination, the maid declares that she, too, wants to protect her family. Her face softens into a warm, resolute smile. Julius looks intently at the blue-haired maid and asks a shocking question. What happened to the real Elizabeth? A promotional page for the series is displayed, advertising open positions for translators, proofreaders, and editors.
The blue-haired girl stares off with a pensive expression, ready for her duties. The pink-haired boy resolves to remain silent as he watches Elizabeth sleeping peacefully. The boy decides he must speak with their father regarding the family's next steps. Left alone, the blue-haired girl is overcome with a sense of quiet melancholy. The father remains stoic and imposing as the family travels together in the carriage. The boy reflects on the unexpected decision to bring Elizabeth along on this journey. A single question remains as they approach their destination. Will they reach the academy? The father explains that he brought Elizabeth because she would be lonely without them. The father gazes at the baby, his stern eyes softening as he watches her. Elizabeth's overwhelming cuteness strikes the father's heart like a literal arrow from above. The El-Toad Royal Academy stands as a grand and secure sanctuary for the noble class. The father discusses security, noting that the palace knights are no longer needed here. The father insists that keeping Elizabeth at the academy is the safest choice of her. Elizabeth lets out a small, curious howl that catches the father's immediate attention. The father looks on with mild confusion as the sun shines brightly over the academy. Elizabeth wonders about her new life as she gazes out at the shimmering academy grounds. Elizabeth rests comfortably while being moved toward the academy's entrance under a watchful eye. The pink-haired boy studies a childcare book and suggests Elizabeth needs more physical activity. The father suggests starting with sword swinging, much to the baby's utter shock and horror. The pink-haired boy rejects the absurd idea, much to the baby's immense visible relief. A vision of intense training fades as the carriage rolls peacefully toward the main building. Upon arrival, the family is greeted by a polite and formal brown-haired academy staff member. The father's overwhelming and dark presence immediately terrifies the poor brown-haired academy staff member. Stuttering in fear, the woman explains that the headmaster is requesting the father's presence. The father carries Elizabeth through the academy, maintaining his dignified and stoic noble bearing. Before leaving, the father entrusts Elizabeth to the boy, commanding him to protect her. The pink-haired boy smiles brightly, fully accepting the responsibility of caring for his sister. The father follows the staff member into the academy, leaving the children on the steps. The boy enthusiastically suggests they take the opportunity to explore the prestigious academy grounds. Elizabeth babbles happily while the boy prepares to show her around their new home. The group moves through the grand, sunlit hallways of the academy to begin their tour. The blue-haired girl uses magic to transform her plain servant outfit into a beautiful dress. The pink-haired boy is completely stunned by the girl's sudden and elegant magical transformation. She explains that her magically crafted clothes allow her to change her appearance at will. They pass a large, formal classroom where many students are gathered for their daily lessons. Students in identical uniforms converse quietly amongst themselves within the bright and airy classroom. The blue-haired girl carries Elizabeth in a basket while following the boy down the corridor. The boy points toward their next destination, highlighting the importance of the academy's massive library. The academy library is revealed as a gargantuan hall, boasting a collection rivaling the palace. The blue-haired girl is left in awe by the sheer scale of the library's collection. Touching a specific book causes it to glow with a strange and powerful magical energy. A memory surfaces of a man smiling from a window while holding up a book. The pink-haired boy calls for them to leave while a memory of loneliness haunts her. In her vision, the brown-haired man returns to her with a wide, joyful smile. A hand rests on the worn leather of an old book, bridging past and present. A younger version of the blue-haired girl weeps while clutching a book to her chest. Back in the present, the girl holds the book with a look of deep, somber reflection. The pink-haired boy notices her change in mood and asks if she is feeling all right. She suggests that instead of discarding the book, they should donate it to an orphanage. A blonde-haired student looks up from his work, observing the group with a curious gaze. The pink-haired boy looks down somberly, asking if they should head to training soon. Carrying the baby in a basket, the blue-haired girl asks if he hates swordsmanship. The pink-haired boy clarifies he does not hate the craft, but the teaching methods. He explains that the instructor assaults magicless students under the guise of special training. Recalling his confrontation, the boy explains the instructor began targeting him for speaking up. A man greets the children, noting it has been a long while since they met. The brown-haired instructor smirks as he taunts the children with his unsettling, dark presence. The instructor is revealed to be Julius Waltzer, looming before them with a wicked smile. From the instructor's perspective, the children appear small and vulnerable in the grand hallway. The blue-haired girl realizes he looks identical to a man from her past life. Silence falls over the grand corridor as the group stares at the taunting instructor. Julius Waltzer mockingly questions if the young master will be participating in today's training. Clapping his hands with glee, the instructor anticipates the fun he will soon have. Stomping his foot, he taunts that the boy's swordsmanship skills have shown no improvement. Looming over the boy, he claims to be praying for him with a manic expression. He whispers maliciously about seeing the father bathed in blood and the boy becoming a monster. With a mocking wave and a false smile, the instructor bids them a casual farewell. Outraged, the blue-haired girl fumes over his insults toward both the boy and their father. She reflects on the instructor's blatant disrespect, specifically his comment calling their father a monster. Recognizing him as a jerk from her past, she prepares to unleash her magic power. Purple magical energy surges from the blue-haired girl's hand as her frustration reaches its peak. The pink-haired boy admits he cannot defeat the former knight despite his lack of regret. He remembers the instructor mocking his parents' lineage and predicting the end of good days. Clenching her fist, the blue-haired girl seethes at the thought of the useless, cruel instructor. She recalls her past life where she was mocked for having very little magic power. A memory of an arrogant man in a library surfaces from her previous existence's struggles. She remembers an incompetent coworker who was a supremacist regarding the possession of magic power. The memory shows her doing all the work that her lazy colleague pushed onto her. The pink-haired boy insists on not bothering their parents with the instructor's problematic behavior. Clenching his fist tightly, the boy asks the girl to simply watch over him for now. The scene shifts to the training grounds where the instructor brutally beats his young students. The blue-haired girl pleads for the instructor to stop his violent behavior toward the children. Standing amidst blooming flowers, the pink-haired boy prepares to face his instructor with a sword. Julius Waltzer declares that a knight's destiny is to put their body on the line. Their swords clash with a heavy strike as the instructor lectures on protecting the country. The instructor lunges with a predatory grin, easily overpowering the boy's defense in their duel. Wounded and exhausted, the pink-haired boy gasps for breath under the hot afternoon sun. The instructor mocks the air, promising not to scar his face as a special exception. A group of horrified students watches alongside the blue-haired girl as the brutal training continues. Recalling the boy's request for silence, the blue-haired girl struggles to remain on the sidelines. The sheer cruelty of the situation becomes almost too much for the girl to bear. The pink-haired boy collapses to the ground, his clothes covered in the grime of defeat. Staring at the floor, he remembers his vow not to lose despite his current state. Feeling like an outsider, the blue-haired girl clenches her eyes shut in deep, painful sympathy. Despite the dirt on his clothes, the pink-haired boy begins to push himself back up. His yellow eyes burn with a fierce, quiet determination after enduring so much for so long. Standing tall with his back to the viewer, the boy prepares to face his challenges once more. He recalls his childhood desire to be just like his father and gain his strength. Training alone as a child, he worked tirelessly to emulate his father's unshakable fighting spirit. Wiping his mouth, the boy admits that he hated the grueling path to becoming strong. A narrative text box declares that his burning desire to become strong remains completely unchanged. Covered in grime, the pink-haired boy stares ahead with intense, glowing yellow eyes of resolve. The blue-haired girl carries the baby, determined to find her own reason to grow stronger. Despite the circumstances, the pink-haired boy reaffirms that she is still his precious little sister. Recalling a promise, the boy struggles to his feet to reach his father's unshakable strength. He vows to surpass his former self and finally achieve the greatness he has long sought. Charging forward, the pink-haired boy unleashes his spirit as his blue gemstone necklace glows brightly. The instructor smirks, but the boy's eyes flare with a sudden, overwhelming surge of hidden power. A massive trail of blue energy follows the boy's sword as he executes a powerful strike. Sweat beads on the brown-haired instructor's face as he barely registers the boy's sudden, incredible speed. A celebratory cheer erupts from the students as a small, red cut appears on Julius's cheeks. Julius Waltzer erupts in a murderous rage, dropping his weapon to conjure a lethal green magic. blood spatters as the instructor cowardly uses magic in a duel, leaving the students in horror. Looming over his victims, the instructor screams for silence, claiming this brutality is a necessary lesson. He mocks the boy's lineage while the blue-haired girl desperately begs for the violence to end. Using the last of her strength, the girl conjures a hexagonal blue shield to protect herself. The instructor prepares a final blow while the girl realizes her magic reserves are completely exhausted. A massive pink explosion shatters the air as the girl's magical power fails to manifest further. A malicious voice cheers the violence as dust and smoke billow across the broken training grounds. Julius smirks in triumph until he notices a pair of polished shoes standing directly before him. The red-headed father arrives, his cold presence immediately casting a long, dark shadow over the scene. A jagged purple text box punctuates the air, signaling the arrival of a final, decisive blow. A thunderous crash echoes as a massive green energy pillar is crushed into the dirt floor. The pink-haired boy looks up in awe while the instructor cowers under the father's icy gaze. Walking toward the fallen instructor, the father ignores the children to focus on the pathetic man. Silence falls over the arena as the father stares down with eyes full of unspoken, lethal judgment. Terrified, Julius recognizes the Duke and stutters, asking about the reason for this sudden, dark commotion. The instructor forcibly smiles, pathetically trying to lie that they were only engaged in routine practice. The father projects a terrifying aura, questioning the man's definition of education while Julius trembles helplessly. Julius stammers a frantic confirmation just as the father's fist begins to glow with blinding light. A series of booming impacts sound as Julius is blasted backward, his body crumpling against the wall. Bathed in a dark purple aura, the father stands victorious over the defeated and bloodied instructor. The pink-haired boy whispers for his father, watching the man's stoic face as the dust settles. Relieved that the danger has passed, the purple-haired baby thinks about how close the situation became. The girl reflects on how she reverted her appearance quickly enough to avoid her father's suspicion. The father remains motionless, his sharp profile silhouetted against the bright light of the academy's windows. Tucked safely in her basket, the purple-haired baby tries to act innocent to play the situation off. Staggering and clutching his side, the pink-haired boy struggles to remain standing after the brutal ordeal. His eyes burn with a mix of pain and fury as he clenches his trembling, dirty arm. The father turns toward his son, calmly asking if the boy feels frustrated by his current weakness. Looking down in shame, the boy admits his anger toward himself for being unable to win. Placing a heavy hand on his son's head, the father tells him never to forget this feeling. He explains that the weight of this frustration will eventually become the boy's greatest future strength. Wiping away a tear, the pink-haired boy accepts his father's words with a newfound, quiet determination. Looking at the baby, the boy silently swears to become strong enough to protect his sister. The training hall is a scene of quiet recovery as medical staff attend to the injured students. Julius groans on the ground before the father's heavy boot comes down with a sharp stomp. Looking up in absolute terror, the instructor realizes he has made a fatal mistake in his arrogance. The father looms over the man like a god of wrath, his eyes glowing with lethal intent. The instructor threatens retaliation, but the father silences him with a final crushing stomp to the head. The sinister instructor mockingly questions if anyone would care if he crushed an annoying insect. Julius Walter coldly orders the students to clean up after a student collapses from exhaustion. The students acknowledge the order while the pink-haired boy watches the somber scene with his sister. With a determined expression, the purple-haired baby clenches her tiny fist in a silent protest. She reflects on why she failed to use her magic during the instructor's brutal attack earlier. Julius calls for Elizabeth while the baby wonders if her magic failed because she was flustered. The young girl looks up at her brother, her eyes filled with curiosity and lingering concern. Despite his bandages and dirt, Julius offers a kind smile to his sister, radiating quiet strength. Polished shoes approach as Julius realizes his emotions are visible while the baby makes curious noises. Julius and his sister notice a dark-skinned student approaching them with a small, mysterious orange container. Julius asks the approaching student if he needs something, prompting a shy and hesitant response. The student offers a special ointment for bruises, leading the girl to wonder about his identity. Recognizing the medicine, the baby identifies it as a product coming from the distant Bian kingdom. A glimpse of the distant kingdom across the sea is revealed through her internal narrative memory. She realizes the student is an exchange student from the seafaring kingdom she just recalled. The student apologizes profusely, but Julius calmly insists there is no need for him to do so. Julius's expression shifts to cold annoyance as he tells the student to leave if he's finished. Julius insults the student as an eyesore, leaving both the exchange student and his sister stunned. The baby realizes her brother's behavior is not what it seems, her cheeks flushing with surprise. Spectators watch the awkward interaction as the girl reflects that this coldness is her brother's true nature. In the past, Julius was known for his harshness toward everyone except for the crown prince. She hopes that since they are family, her brother will choose to be kind to her. A shadow of worry crosses the baby's thoughts as she considers the future if things continue. Julius' cold demeanor returns, casting a chilling shadow that leaves his little sister feeling genuinely terrified. She reflects that her brother's past coldness wasn't just due to their father, but something deeper. Despite her concerns, she reminds herself that she is his precious little sister in this current life. Julius turns around with a look of mild confusion, his expression softening as he gazes at her. The baby lets out a startled exclamation as a new idea suddenly strikes her curious mind. A humorous graphic depicts Julius arrogantly dismissing medicinal help from a classmate as being completely unnecessary. When receiving an apology, Julius remains cold while the baby tries to coach him on proper manners. The baby concludes that Julius would definitely fail any relationship-building exam due to his habitually rude comments. The training hall remains quiet as the awkward standoff between Julius and the exchange student continues. Watching the other students, she worries about how Julius's abrasive personality will affect his future relationships. Julius gazes down at his sister with a questioning look, sensing her deep and troubled thoughts. A heavy silence falls as the exchange student stares at Julius before ultimately looking down in defeat. Realizing she needs to intervene, the baby decides she must act quickly to change the outcome. A soft, round, yellow chick plushie chirps gently as it is held up in someone's hands. In a memory, an older Julius stares at the same chick plushie with a look of bewilderment. Elizabeth stands by the sleeping baby's cradle where a new stuffed chick was hidden among presents. She reflects on how the toy has become attuned to her magic after sitting in her room. Elizabeth holds up the magical chick plushie with a triumphant smile, ready to put her plan into action. She plans to use the chick to interrupt Julius's insults and identifies the exchange student's famous lineage. Elizabeth explains that imbuing the toy with magic will allow her to stay by her brother's side. Julius questions why she feels the need to accompany him to the academy through the enchanted toy. The two share a quiet moment of hesitation before Elizabeth offers her brother a warm, knowing smile. Julius agrees to take the toy with him, and Elizabeth bows deeply in sincere gratitude for his cooperation. Julius reaffirms his vow to protect his sister, explaining the toy is a useful way to stay connected. Elizabeth is deeply moved that, despite knowing her secrets, Julius still calls her his precious little sister. Their father's voice suddenly booms through the grand hallway, catching both Elizabeth and Julius completely off guard. With a spark of magic, the toy is placed into the cradle as she answers her father's call. Julius calls out to his father as the red-haired man enters the room. The father explains he heard voices while looking toward Julius and the empty cradle. Julius smiles nervously and claims he was just talking to himself while his father watches. Julius asks if his father needs something, prompting the man to mention a new exchange student. He mentions tea leaves brought by a merchant guild leader from a neighboring country for Adelina. Elizabeth reflects that receiving tea at the royal palace can be a dangerous political situation. The father asks if Julius understands, and the boy promises to deepen his new friendship. Closing his eyes, the red-haired man acknowledges that his son seems to understand the situation. Julius stands alone in the grand hallway after the heavy doors close behind his father. Tucked in her cradle, the purple-haired baby looks toward the door with a curious expression. Julius looks panicked and calls Elizabeth's name, insisting he has not interacted with the student. Elizabeth holds up her yellow chick plushie and dismissively thinks that she already knows the truth. Looking completely stunned, Julius stammers while staring at the chick plushie his sister is holding. Blushing deeply, Julius admits he needs advice, while the baby cheers in a small, adorable icon. The narrative explains Tesua Najua Lars is an exchange student from the distant Bian kingdom. Tesua, a dark-skinned student with blue eyes, looks on with a shy and hesitant expression. The narrative notes that Tesua is afraid of Julius, who stands nearby with the chick. Julius tells the chick not to say anything, as he is already aware of the problem. Julius watches Tesua walk away and asks the chick for a plan to start speaking. The chick plushie expresses absolute shock at Julius's lack of a real plan for social interaction. Students at the academy watch Julius, whispering about his prominent status and the attention he commands. Julius walks confidently through the academy hallway with the yellow chick perched on his shoulder. Julius expresses his hatred for the attention, while the baby encourages him to use Arapio. Tesua Najua Lars sits alone on a stone bench, quietly eating a sandwich in the garden. A polished shoe approaches as Tesua looks up, startled while mid-bite of his lunch. Tesua stammers Julius's name in surprise as the pink-haired boy stands before him with the chick. Julius asks if Tesua always eats outside, and the dark-skinned student explains that it feels nice. Julius abruptly sits on the bench beside Tesua, causing the other student to recoil in shock. Looking dejected, Julius apologizes for disturbing Tisua and prepares to leave the stone bench. The baby encourages her brother to seize the opportunity as Tisua hesitantly calls out for him. Tisua blushes and stammers, explaining he wanted to thank Julius for the help provided earlier. Julius blushes and deflections the gratitude, while the baby notes he is clearly getting embarrassed. Suddenly, the yellow chick plushie falls from Julius's shoulder, surprising both of the boys. Julius panics and shouts for Elizabeth, causing Tisua to wonder if he is talking to the toy. A brown-haired maid stands in the nursery, holding the purple-haired baby close to her chest. The maid panics as the baby goes limp, desperately calling for someone to help the lady. The father and a maid rush through the halls, frantically calling for a doctor to arrive. The father stares in horror at the unconscious baby, realizing her mana is behaving very erratically. Julius bursts into the room, shouting Elizabeth's name and frantically asking if she is safe. A blue-haired maid shushes Julius, explaining that the doctor ordered the young lady to rest. Julius gently places a small gift by the side of the sleeping purple-haired baby's head. Julius leans in close to his sister's face, staring intently with his bright yellow eyes. Bathed in the dark purple aura, Julius demands a proper talk with his sister very soon. Julius leans over the cradle, asking Elizabeth to explain exactly what happened to her earlier. The purple-haired baby reflects on how she was watching her brother through the magical chick plushie. She recalls hearing something break and attempting to investigate by manifesting a magical maid clone. The magical blue-haired clone appears surprised as she manifests in a bright burst of white light. The clone's form dissolves back into magical energy above the cradle where the baby lies. The purple-haired baby remains fast asleep in her cradle, unaware of the fading magical aura. A brown-haired maid enters the room and gasps in shock at the sight of the baby. The blue-haired maid stands with Julius, reflecting on her earlier presence at the academy grounds. The maid bows to Julius, apologizing for the circumstances that forced him to leave school early. The blue-haired maid dismisses the current concerns, stating that they simply do not matter. She explains that the Duke deemed the situation temporary as mana instability is common in infants. Julius remembers Elizabeth is just a baby before his eyes widen in sudden, startled realization. He asks if her mana is unstable again as the maid begins to glow with light. A brilliant flash of magic erupts, drawing the red-haired boy's attention back to the ornate cradle. Julius looks down in shock as the purple-haired baby Elizabeth finally appears within her soft blankets. He firmly declares that Elizabeth is strictly forbidden from using her clone magic for the time being. The baby protests loudly while Julius looks over the crib, refusing to let her have her way. Julius tells the purple-haired baby that her magic is abnormal and should never have been used. A soft, squishy sound echoing as a hand reaches out and squeezes the yellow chick spirit Aripio. Julius holds the chick, asking if everything is fine while checking the magical stone attached to it. The purple-haired baby Elizabeth laughs with joy while the red-haired boy remains skeptical of the situation. A series of cheerful pips sounding as Elizabeth reaches out with magical sparkles toward her brother. The scene shifts to the Academy Gardens where groups of students gather and chat under the sun. Julius walks down the hallway, promising his chick spirit companion that he will be perfectly fine today. A sharp click sounding as Julius pushes open the heavy classroom door to join his fellow students. A brown-haired boy with striking blue eyes stares in stunned silence as the red-haired Julius arrives. The student blushes deeply and stammers out a surprised response to the Duke's son's presence. Nervous sweat pours down the boy's face while Julius stands stoically with Aripio on his shoulder. Julius offers a curt, polite greeting while the other boy remains completely frozen by his intense presence. The student's blue eyes widen in shock as he continues to stare blankly at the red-haired boy. Julius walks away as the chick spirit notes that the boy has certainly grown up recently. Blushing with annoyance, Julius tells the bird to shut it while the student watches him from afar. The teacher uses a pointer on a large world map while the students listen from their desks. Julius keeps his head down and focuses intently on his book during the quiet classroom lecture. The brown-haired boy works diligently at his desk, carefully recording notes with a feather quill pen. Later in the palace gardens, Julius apologizes for having to cut their previous conversation short yesterday. Elizabeth's voice echoes through the chick spirit, shocked that her brother actually apologized to another student. The brown-haired boy sweats nervously while insisting that the interruption was not a problem at all. Julius observes that the student is skilled in healing magic while holding a book about medicinal plants. Julius claims he is well-informed, while the chick spirit urges him to be much friendlier to others. The student explains his desire to combine healing magic with plants to help more common people. Julius listens as the boy explains how nobility currently monopolizes almost all healing magic within the kingdom. Michael Walzer watches over Elizabeth at night, asking his staff to keep monitoring her unstable condition. The doctor confirms the mana instability while Michael asks if there are any other potential causes. The physician warns that it is an extremely rare case while Elizabeth sleeps peacefully in her crib. A soft mumble sounding as Michael gently touches his daughter, telling her not to push herself. Michael declares that Elizabeth will become the true light of the Walzer family as she rests quietly.
A faint, ominous purple glow flickers in Elizabeth's hair while she remains deep in her slumber.
Sunlight bathes the magnificent palace as the name of the purple-haired girl is called out loud. Dressed in a formal blue vest, Julius stands in a grand room waiting for his sister's arrival. Julius looks on with a soft expression as Elizabeth lets out a curious, high-pitched baby sound.
Elizabeth pulls on the yellow chick spirit as her brother mentions a visitor who is an exchange student.
Julius looks away with a serious expression while Elizabeth notes her surprise at him using names. Elizabeth cheers for her brother's success while Julius watches the purple-haired baby with a weary sigh. Julius explains that their father gave permission to introduce her after relying on her brother's judgment.
The purple-haired baby poses playfully while Julius firmly reminds her to behave herself during the meeting.
Julius sternly repeats his order regarding the ban on clone magic, causing Elizabeth to pout indignantly. Standing in the sunlit garden, Julius informs Elizabeth that their father is currently at the royal palace. Elizabeth suggests visiting their mother next, hoping she hasn't collapsed from overworking herself at her post. Julius reassures the baby that nothing is wrong while she gazes up at him with confusion. The nursery maid watches the siblings from afar, happily noting that Julius and Elizabeth get along well. A sprawling white palace under a clear blue sky serves as the grand office for the kingdom's chancellor. In a quiet office, a blue-haired woman is informed that Duke Walzer has arrived for an audience. A red shoe steps firmly into the room as the chancellor grants permission for the visitor to enter. Duke Walzer stands tall in his red military uniform, his expression stoic and formal as he enters. The chancellor remarks that it is rare for the duke to show concern for her personal health. The blue-haired woman smiles, explaining that the tea leaves provided by the duke have greatly improved her health. The chancellor notes that the tea makes her body feel lighter while the duke watches her drink calmly. The duke advises her not to overwork while she explains she tires more easily than most people. The duke mentions Julius's new friend from beyond, surprising the chancellor with how quickly the news has traveled. The chancellor reflects on fostering international relations and shares that she was thanked because her son was saved. She apologizes for forgetting to thank the duke for importing the precious tea leaves earlier. The duke asks her to inform him sooner next time, and the chancellor promises to do her best. The duke observes that these events should silence the nobles who are reluctant to form ties with Beyond. Narrations explain that while most nobles are moderate, some greedy factions hope to profit from potential war.
The Duke confirms that Elizabeth has recovered, prompting the Chancellor to conclude that no further reports are needed.
The duke departs for the knight's order, leaving the blue-haired woman alone with her tea and documents. Beneath a sunlit garden gazebo, Julius and Tesua enjoy a quiet tea party together with baby Elizabeth. Tesua Najul Lar sits nervously at the table, sweating slightly as he eats mid-party with the royal siblings. Julius formally introduces Elizabeth to his friend while the baby cheers happily and clutches her chick plushie. Elizabeth lets out an enthusiastic baby noise, causing Tesua to jump in surprise at her sudden friendly greeting. Blushing deeply and covering his mouth, Tesua is completely overwhelmed by how incredibly adorable the baby is. A hand reaches out to pick up a porcelain cup filled with the steaming light purple tea.
Julius explains that the tea is from Tesua's home country to help the student feel more comfortable.
Julius takes a slow sip of his tea while asking if the familiar drink helps Tesua feel relaxed.
Tesua gazes at his cup, looking touched by the kindness and thoughtfulness Julius has shown him today.
Blushing with gratitude, Tesua drinks the tea that reminds him of his distant home in the Bayan Kingdom. Elizabeth watches the two boys with wide, curious blue eyes, looking satisfied with her brother's social progress. Julius mentions that his father originally gave the restorative tea leaves to his mother to support her health. Overhead, the tea party continues as Julius reveals he shared the tea because his mother was often overworked.
Julius looks away with a shy expression while Tesua expresses his deep gratitude for the boy's kindness.
Tesua humble dismisses the praise while the baby watches the peaceful interaction from her small white carriage. Elizabeth's expression turns to pure shock as she watches a small pink jar fall toward the ground. A loud crash echoes through the garden as the jar shatters, breaking the peaceful silence of the party. Julius panics as Elizabeth suddenly collapses, her body surrounded by a dark aura while Tesua looks on horrified. Tesua identifies Elizabeth's condition as an illness where a person's mana is gradually and dangerously depleted. Trembling with fear, Julius desperately asks Tesua to explain what happens to someone when this illness manifests. A heavy silence fills the gazebo as Tesua looks down, hesitant to reveal the grim truth to Julius. A somber message confirms that this mysterious mana illness inevitably leads to death within only a few years. Looking down at the unconscious baby, the narrative grimly notes that there are absolutely no exceptions to this. Elizabeth lies limp and suffering in her carriage, her face pale as her magical condition rapidly worsens. Julius barks orders for a doctor and for someone to alert their father at the royal palace.
Close-ups of Elizabeth's neck reveal a flickering purple magical aura as she struggles to remain conscious and breathe.
Julius cradles his sister's face with a trembling hand, his expression filled with intense grief and raw fear. Tesua warns that while some survive for a few years, it is uncertain if Elizabeth can endure long. Julius stares in wide-eyed horror as the reality of his sister's potentially fatal condition finally sinks in.
Tesua explains that humans can convert magic into life force, allowing those with abundant magic to sustain themselves. Necrea disease is the reverse process where life force becomes magic. While documented in adults, children are vulnerable.
Fear and uncertainty cloud Julius's mind as he wonders what will become of his precious little sister, Elizabeth. Desperate to reach his children, Duke Walter gallops his horse across a bridge, racing back toward the palace. Duke Walter arrives at the palace gates on horseback, greeted by a butler in a formal black suit. Reaching out with a gloved hand, Duke Walter urgently asks the butler for a report on Elizabeth's condition. Duke Walter removes his white gloves as he prepares to enter the nursery with a maid following behind.
Walking down the hallway, the maid explains that the doctor is currently examining the young lady inside. Bowing her head, the maid apologizes for taking action during the crisis before receiving the master's formal instructions.
Duke Walter reassures the maid that her quick response was fine given the severity of the medical emergency.
A quick click sounds as the maid reaches out to open the door to the young lady's room.
Duke Walter enters the nursery where the doctor, Julius, and Tesua are gathered around the baby's cradle. Approaching the bed, Duke Walter formally inquires about his daughter's current health status following her sudden collapse.
The doctor explains that Julius's decision to administer a magic recovery potion earlier was an excellent medical judgment.
Duke Walter offers praise to Julius, but the pink-haired boy looks away and begins to decline the compliment.
Julius looks conflicted and prepares to explain the actual events that transpired during the tea party in the garden. Behind Julius, Tesua Najul Lars stands nervously while Duke Walter maintains a stoic and very intense presence.
The doctor looks down with a somber and regretful expression, appearing burdened by the diagnosis he must deliver.
The doctor reveals that the young lady has a fatal illness called Necrea disease caused by magic depletion.
Duke Walter closes his eye for a moment, absorbing the gravity of his daughter's life-threatening medical condition.
Duke Walter acknowledges the diagnosis, noting the potion only provided temporary relief and shouldn't be used frequently on infants.
The doctor laments that he performed every possible treatment, but it was not enough to cure the disease. Duke Walter commands that this matter must remain a secret and not be spoken of to any others.
The doctor and Tesua Najul Lars bow respectfully as they are dismissed from the room by the Duke. Duke Walter demands a detailed explanation of the events from Tesua, his green eyes glowing with intense pressure.
Overwhelmed by the Duke's formidable aura, a small chibi version of Tesua stammers out a terrified, polite response.
Elizabeth lies small and vulnerable in her large white crib as the scene shifts to a quiet atmosphere.
Looking pale and sweating, Elizabeth struggles with her worsening condition as her breathing becomes shallow and difficult.
Trapped in a dark memory, the baby reflects on a past life filled with terrible dizziness and nausea.
The scene shifts to a past life where a woman sits alone at a desk buried under mountains of paperwork.
Men pile more books on her desk while she reflects on how she just wanted someone to rely on. An official points a finger at her, shouting for her to hurry her work and stop slacking off immediately. Another man laughs mockingly, asserting that people of common birth should simply obey the whims of the nobles. A loud thump sounds as she grips her desk, her hand trembling under the weight of the constant overwork. Clutching a book, she feels she cannot allow herself to lose to people as cruel as those around her.
Her hand shakes violently as she loses her grip on a piece of paper amidst her failing health. A dull thud echoes through the office as she collapses to the floor with papers flying around her.
She lies motionless on the ground, realizing her body will no longer move as the darkness closes in. Reaching out a trembling hand, her vision fades into black as she recalls her previous life's final moments.
Elizabeth's eyes snap open in the present, her large teal irises filled with confusion and traces of lingering fear.
Duke Walter cradles his daughter's head, softly reassuring her that everything is all right now that he is here. Looking down with intense grief and resolve, Duke Walter solemnly swears that he will find a way to save her. A table is laden with tea and treats as the dialogue addresses Tesua by a formal lady's title. Sitting on a sofa, Duke Walter asks if the Lars family has conducted any research on the Necrea disease.
Duke Walter expresses his deep gratitude to Tesua, acknowledging that his daughter was saved thanks to the boy's help.
Julius looks toward his father, speaking the word father as he prepares to contribute to the serious conversation. Duke Walter turns his head, giving his son his full attention with a stoic and calm expression. Julius watches his father with a hopeful gaze, waiting for a response to his unspoken question or concern. Duke Walzer nods in understanding as Tisua remains bowing his head politely in the background of the room. Julius expresses his shock that Tisua already knew of a specific method to suppress the effects of magic depletion. Tisua explains that having a magic stone can slow down the decrease in magical power for those suffering. Julius remarks on the miracle of finding a compatible stone for Elizabeth, while Tisua listens from the side. Julius looks away with a pained expression as he reflects on the difficult road ahead for his sister. Julius asks his father if there are any magic stones currently available to help with Elizabeth's medical treatment. Duke Walzer commands the box be brought forward while Julius and Tisua watch from the table. A servant's attention is taken by the heavy box as he places it down with a thud. Julius and Tisua stare in utter disbelief at the overwhelming purple glow emanating from the open container. Staring at the luminous contents, Julius asks in shock if this is truly a supreme magic stone. Julius urgently asks his father where he could have possibly obtained such a rare and powerful artifact. Duke Walzer explains that His Majesty granted him a small amount after the magic crystals were discovered. Cheapy versions of the boy sweat nervously, wondering how the Duke could possibly call this hoard small. Elizabeth lies peacefully in her crib as a large, glowing purple magic stone is placed beside her. A soft coo escapes the baby's lips as the restorative purple light begins to swirl around her. Elizabeth gazes into the stone's facets, finding comfort in the reflection of her own small, curious face. The narrative notes that there are very few reported cases of this particular mana-draining medical condition. The mysterious illness is noted to have an unknown cause and is seemingly unique to women alone. Elizabeth drifts into a peaceful sleep while the magic stone continues to pulse with a gentle light. A sudden realization causes Elizabeth's eyes to snap open as a sharp sound startles her from sleep. The baby looks toward the nursery door with wide eyes, sensing someone approaching her during the quiet evening. Duke Walzer enters the room with a somber expression, his green eyes fixed on his recovering daughter. Elizabeth makes an adorable baby noise to reassure her father that she is feeling much better now. Reaching for her father's hand, the baby lets out a joyful cry of recognition as she smiles. The brown-haired maid asks if it is truly safe to leave the powerful magic stone in the crib. Duke Walzer instructs her to place it against Elizabeth's skin if symptoms of mana depletion ever return. Elizabeth smiles warmly, though she thinks about how many questions she still wants to ask her brother. Duke Walzer solemnly remarks that the kingdom lacks any real specialists capable of treating this rare disease. A close-up highlights the deep bond and mutual worry shared between the stoic father and his daughter. A blue-haired woman barges into the hallway despite the servants' frantic attempts to stop her unannounced entry. Adelina commands silence from the servants as she determinedly makes her way toward the baby's nursery room. With golden eyes burning with resolve, Adelina declares that she has every right to be there as a waltzer. Elizabeth looks up in surprise as her father turns to face the sudden intruder at the nursery door. Adelina stares at the crib with a look of pure shock and heartbreak as she sees her daughter. Overwhelmed by raw emotion, Adelina covers her mouth as tears begin to well in her golden eyes. Duke Walzer speaks Adelina's name softly while placing a comforting hand on her trembling shoulder. The Duke pulls the distraught woman close, offering her silent support as she struggles with her grief. Looking back at the crib, Duke Walzer orders the staff to inform him immediately if Elizabeth's condition changes. The maid bows respectfully as the Duke leads Adelina away from the room to speak in private. Elizabeth watches her parents leave, her large blue eyes reflecting a sense of confusion and lingering sadness. The baby shudders and wipes her eyes, thinking about how terrifyingly intense the previous interaction felt. Standing outside the ornate white doors, the Duke and Adelina share a moment of heavy, somber silence. Adelina cries out that she no longer cares about her own safety or what might happen to her. Duke Walzer urges her to calm down, warning that her extreme distress could trigger another medical attack. He reminds Adelina that as Prime Minister, she must focus on ensuring the success of the upcoming meeting. Adelina acknowledges the truth but admits she simply cannot bring herself to accept their daughter's tragic fate. The narrative reflects that while Necria disease is already rare, it is even more cruel for Elizabeth. Adelina weeps openly, lamenting that her own daughter must now suffer from the very same fatal illness. A decorative frame appears, identifying the speaker as a member of a branch of the Walzer family. Reflecting on the past, she recalls how her beauty and talent once drew the royal family's keen attention. Her world shattered when she contracted Necria disease just one day before her highly anticipated social debut. She was sent to a villa in a neighboring country to recover, though her prospects remained grimly uncertain. While slowly dying, she miraculously survived thanks to a magic stone that stabilized her failing mana levels.
Despite surviving, she was cruelly cast out from high society after losing her once abundant magical power. Recalling the humiliation, she clenches her fist as she remembers the pain of being discarded by her peers.
She reflects on her deep resentment toward the foolish nobles who valued nothing beyond raw magical ability.
Adelina recalls the mysterious man who once appeared before her during her darkest time. Michael says, "I've come to buy your abilities, lend me your aid." Seeing him, a man who despised those with talent regardless of their magic power, she realized something.
Reaching out to grasp his hand, she decided she had to change things herself. She achieved the highest score on the notoriously difficult examination for royal court civil officials.
While still battling fits from the uncured Necria disease, she started a beautiful new family.
Dressed in a white gown and holding flowers, she looked radiant on her wedding day. In the present, the Duke stands by her side as she reflects on the disease.
Tears well in her golden eyes as she asks if the child's illness is her fault.
The red-haired Duke leans in close to explain that Necria disease is not always hereditary. He places his hands on her shoulders, offering silent strength and comfort during this trial. Duke Walzer explains, Elizabeth has a large amount of magic power. A magic stone can buy us time, but it won't last long. Adelina asserts, it's all right. I swore to that child that I would find a way. Their hands join together in a firm grasp, reinforcing the deep bond between the two. Duke Walzer looks at her with a gentle gaze and notes, you've changed. Elizabeth lies in her crib, pondering the harsh reality of her new life in this country. Magic power equals authority here, and her mother likely became chancellor through the Walzer family. Information about noblewomen with Necria is suppressed to maintain the family's prestige and social standing. Elizabeth watches the servants hurry about, realizing why the household atmosphere feels so incredibly tense. The number of servants was reduced even further to ensure total secrecy regarding her condition. A brown-haired maid leans over the crib with a kind and very attentive expression. Looking down at the baby, the maid asks, are you hungry? Do you need a new diaper? The maid says, my sincerest apologies. It needs to be changed, doesn't it? As Elizabeth grabs the stone. A soft purple glow surrounds Elizabeth as she lies back while the maid works nearby. Backing away from the crib, the maid says, my apologies, my lady. I will be more careful from now on. A small blue bubble adds, sorry for the trouble. Elizabeth flails her arms in frustration, thinking about how incredibly inconvenient this baby body is. She reflects on being finally reborn, yet she remains trapped by her current physical limitations. The family gathers around the crib with a stuffed rabbit, trying to cheer the baby up. A chibi version of Elizabeth cries out that she truly does not want to die yet. Julius calls out Elizabeth's name as he leans over the crib to check on her. Julius and Tesua enter the room with Tesua carrying a large red medical doctor's bag. Julius tells her not to be down while she lets out a soft, curious coo. Julius says Tesua has been looking into various things for us. Elizabeth coos, Da? Really? Looking at Julius with a bead of sweat, Tesua thinks, is he actually talking to a baby? Julius says, this is the same data I submitted to Lord Walzer, while showing Tesua a paper. Looking at the baby, the narrator notes, this results in symptoms identical to magic power depletion. Repeatedly replenishing magic power to recover is nothing more than a temporary fix. Julius asks, so what can be done for a fundamental cure? Tesua looks down at the document and solemnly replies, the research on this disease. Tesua says, that's why it piqued my interest, and I began researching it on my own. Julius listens in silence, his eyes fixed on Tesua as the weight of the situation sinks in. Elizabeth watches with wide eyes, thinking to herself in shock, he's reading it. A sudden realization startles the baby as she stares up at the boys with wide eyes. She recalls that the Lars family are renowned throughout the kingdom as masters of healing magic. Elizabeth lets out an energetic baby cry, startling Julius as she tries to communicate her thoughts. She continues to babble loudly, her purple and blue hair becoming quite messy as she moves. Julius says, good, you seem energetic. Elizabeth thinks to herself, this is still way too inconvenient. A sharp cry of wah sounds as she kicks. The scene shifts to a dark, cold room where a mysterious woman sits alone in thought. The blonde woman says, I see, so the Walzer's daughter is ill. A dark, shadowy presence looms behind her as she sits in the center of the room. Looking over her fan, the woman says, if a young child develops the disease, there's likely no hope of survival. Hiding a dark smirk behind her fan, she seems to delight in the tragic news. Julius presents a beautifully crafted letterboard featuring ancient symbols to help the baby communicate. Looking at the letterboard, Julius explains that the device should finally allow them to communicate. Elizabeth looks on in shock as her brother proudly claims he understood her previous message.
Basking in the attention, Elizabeth smugly thinks to herself that Julius should keep the praises coming. Julius remains by the crib, explaining his findings while the baby listens with intense curiosity. Elizabeth reflects on the strange discovery that the vital medical research was suddenly and unnaturally suspended. Julius explains that the abrupt halt in research is exactly what made Tesua become suspicious. The pair share a quiet moment of focus as a servant enters to deliver a message. A brown-haired maid announces a visitor's arrival, and Julius tells her to let the guest in. Bursting through the door, Tesua urgently calls for Julius while the maid follows closely behind him. Tesua rushes to the bedside, breathlessly declaring that he has an important update to report. In a grand room, the Duke discusses the alliance between his son and the other family. The dark-haired man laughs heartily, remarking on the unexpected partnership between their two young sons. Duke Walter shifts the tone of the meeting, bringing up the serious matter of nuclear disease. The man's expression turns somber as he confirms the grim reality that there is no cure. The Duke questions this, noting the legendary reputation the Lars family has for curing any illness. A tense close-up shows the Duke's piercing blue eyes as the other man begins to sweat. He explains that the condition would be curable, but only if it were actually an illness. A maid informs Julius that Elizabeth is watching them, causing the boy to turn in surprise. A quick click sounds as the maid bows respectfully and begins to exit the nursery. Tesua exclaims loudly that he has uncovered why the research on Nukria was stopped. Julius asks for clarification, and Tesua reveals the shocking truth that it was never a disease. Tesua explains it was sorcery, suggesting the family is actually suffering from a dark type of curse. He explains his family backed away because it was only a theory, leaving Julius visibly stunned. Tesua recounts finding a journal revealing that the royal family had actually taken over the research. Julius stares in disbelief, trying to process the revelation that the royalty is involved. Elizabeth recalls her past life as a librarian, remembering a specific report detailing this exact condition. Looking at the text, she realizes that what she thought was a disease is actually a curse. Elizabeth wonders about the origin of the magic while a blue energy begins to gather around her. Julius spots the glowing stone and calls out to Elizabeth, realizing something strange is happening. Blue mana begins to swirl around the baby as she stares at her hands in shock. Mana flows out through the window as the boys watch the energy drain from the room. Elizabeth reaches out toward her brother, asking him to pick her up in her baby babble. Tesua asks if she is feeling unwell or if her distress is caused by sudden anxiety. Julius suggests taking her to the window as Elizabeth points her small finger toward the view. Carrying her to the balcony, Julius looks out over the landscape while Elizabeth watches intently. Spotting the destination of the flowing mana, Elizabeth internally exclaims that she has found the source. The baby looks toward the horizon, realizing that the magic is pointing directly at the royal palace. A soft patting sounds as Elizabeth taps on her brother to get his immediate attention. She points to her letterboard to indicate that she must speak with her big brother. Elizabeth taps out a message, suggesting that the cause of the curse is hidden within the palace. Julius looks at the message in shock, holding the baby close as he reads her findings. He asks why she feels she must go, suggesting they delegate the task to others. Elizabeth insists on going herself because she can see the magic, despite her brother's safety concerns. Julius looks down at the determined baby, his face etched with worry for her safety. Julius erupts with a surge of lightning-like power, furiously refusing to let her take such a risk. A promotional banner invites readers to support the series and join the community for more updates. Duke Walter ponders the realization that the royal family has been hiding the truth about the research. He questions if someone within the El-Toad kingdom is responsible for carrying out the dark magic. The Duke realizes with horror that Adelina's previous illness was also likely the result of a curse. Records reveal that in the past, other noble families were also diagnosed with the clear disease. Julius and the Duke discuss how the royal family intentionally abandoned the research for this condition. Enveloped in a spectral flame, the Duke realizes there must be a hidden, sinister root cause. He vows to incinerate the entire country to hold the royal family accountable for their negligence. The scene shifts back to the nursery where the siblings gather in the quiet of night. Julia strongly opposes her plan, while Elizabeth realizes another seizure could prove fatal to her. Elizabeth reflects on her rare ability to see mana, a gift usually reserved for palace magicians. The royal palace stands tall, yet its powerful inhabitants remain unreachable for those seeking medical aid. A soft sigh escapes as Elizabeth resolves to do her best despite her current physical limitations. Julius remains entirely unyielding, his sharp gaze reflecting his absolute refusal to let her risk herself. He questions how she expects to infiltrate the palace while still trapped in a baby's body. Julius reminds her that their father is the very man who manages the elite palace guard. Duke Walter stands among his soldiers, asserting that any unauthorized entry is completely impossible to achieve.
Elizabeth decides to use magic and brute force, much to her brother's shock and alarm. An energetic cry of "Yah!" sounds as Elizabeth kicks her legs while Julius holds her up. She demands to be let go as a brilliant purple light erupts from her magic stone. Tisua suddenly appears to assist, taking the baby as a swirling blue energy fills the room.
Tisua declares his refusal to accept death and his unwavering determination to find a way out. A moment of silence follows as Julius stares at his friend's unexpected and sudden show of resolve. Tisua insists on fighting for survival until the very end while holding the glowing baby close.
Julius looks on in shock, finally seeing the intense spark of determination within his quiet friend. He acknowledges that this stubborn refusal to lose is what makes him a true Walzer family member. Julius smiles confidently, promising he won't lose either, as Elizabeth watches them with wide, curious eyes.
The grand palace towers loom over the landscape as night settles over the royal capital city.
A rhythmic clicking of footsteps alerts a guard, who turns his attention toward the dark walkway. A sharp shout of "Stop!" echoes as the guard confronts two hooded figures in the shadows. They present their official medals, prompting the guard to immediately allow them to pass through the gate. Julius regrets not using the passes sooner, surprised by how easily they move through the checkplate. He credits their smooth entry to the First Queen's massive influence and the authenticity of the passes. Julius retorts that as a duke's son, an escort was a necessary part of his cover. They discuss a previous invitation from the First Queen that Julius had intentionally put on hold. Narrative boxes explain the military prestige of their father and the administrative authority of their mother.
Within the palace walls, Prime Minister Adelina is recognized as the one who holds the strongest authority.
Julius suspects his mother relayed the queen's attempts to meddle to their father through palace channels. He refuses to concede his point, and Tisua agrees as they prepare for the next step. As they walk through the hall, a stream of blue mana points directly toward a passing official. Duke Walzer appears in the grand hallway, walking past without noticing the boys hiding nearby. Startled, the pair quickly pull back into the shadows to avoid being spotted by their father. From behind a corner, they watch the Duke engage in conversation with a subordinate palace official. Tisua spots a glowing pink document and realizes it is the key information they have been seeking. A quiet whisper of "wait" sounds as Julius tries to keep his friend from acting too impulsively. The official focuses on his papers, completely unaware that he is being trailed by the boys. Tisua approaches the official, politely inquiring about the documents he is currently carrying down the hall. As Tisua touches the book, Elizabeth is struck by a sudden and terrifyingly vivid vision of carnage. The vision depicts a horrific massacre within the palace, with blood and bodies covering the floor. Fire consumes the grand halls as people scream in terror during a catastrophic and violent event. In the center of the slaughter, a cold-eyed Duke Walzer ruthlessly orders everyone to die. Shaken by the vision, Tisua quickly apologizes to the official and claims it was all a mistake. Julius asks what he is doing, noticing Tisua's wide, trembling eyes and his sudden, haunting realization. Pale with fear, Tisua whispers that he feels his father might actually kill him in the future. Tisua trembles with fear as Julius watches him with an expression of deep concern. A chilling realization of a fate worse than disease haunts the long, silent palace hallway. Julius asks if he is all right, but Tisua insists they must keep moving quickly forward. Julius worries about the consequences of his father finding him away from the safety of home. The boys realize their presence makes them look suspicious as they navigate the grand palace interior. Tisua fears his father's lethal wrath, while a trail of blue mana flows toward the crowd. Hiding behind a buffet table, the boys watch the elegant guests enjoy the lavish royal ball. Tisua points toward the crowd, narrowing down the location of the magical energy they are tracking. A group of noblewomen stand near the stairs, led by a golden-haired woman in rut. The boys determine that the magical medium is hidden near the First Queen Consort's prominent location. Their focus shifts to a vibrant red fan, confirming it is the object fueling the curse. Deep within the ballroom, high-ranking officials and nobility gather in tight, secretive circles to converse. Duke Walzer and King Arthur meet, their stiff posture suggesting a meeting of great political significance. The Duke remarks on the king's bold approach while they stand in the middle of the hall. The king inquires about security, and the red-haired Duke assures him that his vigilance is absolute. A moment of silence falls between the two powerful men as the king remains deep in thought. King Arthur admits his lack of medical expertise, while the Duke listens with a sharp, calculating gaze. The king mentions hearing rumors that the disease is actually a curse held by the royal family. The Duke questions if the king is truly aware of the sinister nature of the ongoing situation. Arthur Fiatel Elto declares his absolute devotion to resolving the matter for the kingdom's sake. Narrative text describes the complex reputation of the benevolent king who remains popular among the commoners. He is characterized as a charismatic leader who supports appointing talented individuals regardless of their social status. A gilded portrait showcases the king and his dark-haired queen in a moment of quiet affection. The Duke emphasizes the urgency of the investigation, and the king agrees to look into it. The king casually dismisses the immediate threat, planning to act only after the current festivities conclude. Frustration mounts for the Duke as he insists the matter requires His Majesty's immediate and undivided attention. The king dismisses the Duke's concern, arguing that the victims of the curse are currently too few. He prioritizes seeing his beloved queen over the Duke's report, leaving the serious matter for later. King Arthur glows with joy at the sight of his destined rose as the Duke gloos. Enraged by the king's dismissive attitude, Duke Waltzer clenches his fist until his knuckles turn white. The first queen consort stands elegantly among her peers holding the red fan that glows ominously. From their cramped hiding place, Julius and Tesua watch the escalating tension with wide, fearful eyes. A sharp cracking sound echoes as the Duke's power begins to fracture a glass nearby in fury. An oppressive, dark purple aura erupts from the Duke as his eyes glow with a murderous light. Hidden beneath the tablecloth, the boys tremble as the Duke's sheer presence causes the glassware to shatter. The king remains oblivious to the danger, holding his queen close while dismissing any immediate concerns.
Tesua panics, realizing they are about to be discovered as the Duke's rage reaches its boiling point.
He fears the entire ball is on the verge of ruin due to his father's terrifying outburst. A cold threat escapes the Duke's lips as glass shards fly through the air, startling the guests. A sudden commotion sweeps through the ballroom as the king asks if there are any civilian casualties. The Duke's golden eyes pierce through the dark aura as he prepares to unleash his full power. With a final low whisper, the Duke decides that the time for restraint has officially come to an end. Purple lightning crackles around the Duke's hand as he prepares to strike with overwhelming magical force. Blood splatters across the floor as Tesua is caught in the crossfire, coughing violently from the impact. Looking down at the bleeding boy, the red-haired man's expression remains chillingly cold and entirely unmoving. Tesua sees a ghostly vision of Elizabeth reaching out to him as he struggles to stay conscious. The Duke stands tall, his gaze fixed on the horizon as he ignores the carnage around him. Blood drips from Tesua's mouth while the queen watches the scene with a mix of shock. A sudden dull thud sounds as the Duke catches the collapsing boy before he hits the ground. King Arthur demands to know what happened as he stares at the chaotic and bloody scene unfolding. Duke Waltzer urges the king to retreat while Arthur wonders if they are under attack. A sudden cough of blood escapes the boy as he asks about the official safety. Relieved that his father has regained control, Julius watches the Duke hold the injured boy. Panic spreads through the ballroom as guests react with fear to the sudden violent outburst. A horrific scream pierces the air while blood splatters across the floor of the grand hall. The first queen and her companion watch in stunned silence as the chaotic atmosphere intensifies. With golden eyes burning, Julius prepares to strike and commands his allies to act immediately. Julius launches a concentrated beam of green magic directly at the cursed red fan object. A sharp clatter echoes through the hall as the wooden handle of the fan breaks. Julius shatters the medium with a magic circle, successfully neutralizing the source of the curse.
Dark energy billows from the first queen as she collapses, clutching her head in agony.
The curse rebounds, turning the woman's hair white as she screams in a desperate, failing voice. King Arthur holds his queen close, watching the aftermath of the curse's violent reversal.
Duke Waltzer turns his sharp gaze toward a nearby guard, demanding immediate and absolute obedience.
Guards surge forward to secure the area as the Duke stands firmly with the injured boy. Weak and bleeding, the boy points out the white-haired woman as the one who cast the curse. Julius pants with exertion, relieved that his gamble to destroy the magical medium finally paid off. The Duke commands Julius to keep a close watch on the fallen woman without pause. Supporting his friend, Julius acknowledges his father's order with a determined and solemn expression. The Duke strides toward the caster while the boys remain behind amidst the shocked ballroom crowd.
A pensive silence falls over the Duke as he reflects on the events of earlier that night.
Julius questions why his father unleashed such a terrifying amount of power during the recent confrontation. The Duke remains stoic and silent, his cold eyes fixed on the task currently at hand. As the Duke approaches the perpetrator, the two boys rest on the floor behind him. Looking up at the man, Julius whispers for his father with a mix of awe and fear. Palace guards surround the shriveled white-haired woman as she kneels helplessly on the ballroom floor. The woman cries out in desperation, pleading that the situation is not what it seems. A sharp gasp of shock escapes her as the reality of her defeat begins to sink in. The Duke looms over the trembling woman, his presence offering no room for mercy or escape. An official guides the dark-haired queen away from the scene of the curse's final ugly collapse. The Queen expresses her deep disappointment in the betrayal despite the trust she had once offered. Queen Claudia walks away, leaving the broken, white-haired woman to face the consequences of her actions. A magic constraint snaps around the woman's neck, causing her to fall to the floor. The Duke stares down at the restrained woman, his expression unreadable as she lies defeated. Bound by a magic constraint, the woman is ignored as the Queen hides behind her fan. Narrative text confirms the woman's family was demoted from the rank of Count to Baron. Despite the internal palace turmoil, the Queen maintains her reputation as a merciful and kind leader. The narrative notes that the Duke's near-berserk state went unnoticed by the guests despite the damage. A lone Duke Walter walks through the palace, the narrative admitting the fault was partially his. Back at home, the blue-haired mother and Julius stand beside Elizabeth's ornate golden baby crib. The mother inquires about Elizabeth's condition while the infant sleeps soundly in her soft bed. She happily observes that the baby's mana is returning and the curse has finally been lifted. Julius watches his sister with a bright smile, relieved that their dangerous mission was a success. He frets over explaining his true identity to his father, fearing the Duke's inevitable, terrifying rage. The Duke walks through the palace halls with a faceless, focused intensity as the day progresses.
A gentle glow fills the room as the mother checks on the peacefully resting baby Elizabeth.
The memory of the Duke's terrifying entrance haunts Julius as a door creaks open with light. Duke Walter stands in the dark, his eyes glowing with a murderous and truly oppressive intent. 3 days pass as the palace moves to cover up the details of the Duke's rampage. A hazy memory of the ballroom confrontation lingers as the political situation begins to settle down. Duke Walter returns home after finishing the arduous task of cleaning up at the royal palace. Julius and the baby gasp as the Duke sternly demands an explanation for their recent actions. Julius nervously addresses his father as the heavy atmosphere in the room becomes increasingly tense. Narrative text explains how the magic leaking from Elizabeth's body had flowed toward the royal palace. Julius recalls how he sensed magic that night, his golden eyes glowing with a sudden realization. The boy discovers that focusing his mind allows him to faintly detect nearby traces of magical power. Looking out the window, from above the golden baby crib, the towering Duke looks down at his 2 young children. With eyes glowing an intense yellow, the Duke questions Julius's claims with a truly menacing expression. Julius maintains his story as Elizabeth lets out a soft, distressed sound from within her bed. A maid nervously wonders if the young lady is upset or perhaps just needs a diaper change. A sudden sob escapes the baby as a woman picks her up before the watchful Duke. The Duke asks about the insignias, which Julius confirms are safely stored away in his room. Looking slightly hesitant, Julius begins to speak as he prepares to share more information with his father. Duke Walter stands tall in the ornate room, his expression remaining perfectly stoic and entirely unreadable. He notes that the insignias issued by the royal family require a very special type of processing. As the baby is held, the narrative mentions the special magical properties imbued within the royal items. A hazy memory shows Julius in a dark cloak, looking back with a clearly worried expression. The Duke warns his son to be extremely cautious about who receives those specific royal items. For security reasons, the Duke claims to know the identities of every single guest at the ball. Julius looks at his father with wide eyes and a blushing face, filled with absolute admiration. Julius praises his father while Elizabeth's internal thoughts reflect shock at the Duke's incredible social memory. The baby realizes that even her past life self couldn't manage such a massive feat of intelligence. Elizabeth worries that her brother is becoming too obsessed with imitating their father's terrifyingly cold demeanor. A close-up reveals the Duke's sharp eyes glowing as he focuses his attention on the infant. The scene shifts as the Duke approaches and a large gloved hand reaches toward the baby. Elizabeth lets out a happy smile as she feels the warmth of her father's hand approaching. The Duke gently pats the purple-haired baby's head, showing a rare and subtle moment of affection. He observes that the child seems to be recovering well as he looks down with softened eyes. Elizabeth laughs joyfully, her face lighting up as flowers bloom in the background during the tender moment. Julius asks if there is any chance that Elizabeth might fall ill from the curse again. The Duke explains that the Necria disease is a curse that cannot be cast repeatedly on victims. He mentions another detail while his sharp eye remains focused on the ongoing conversation with Julius. Narrative text confirms that the magical medium responsible for the curse has been completely destroyed. Both children look slightly awkward and sweaty as they process the heavy information their father provided. Julius shifts the topic, looking directly at his father with an eager and curious expression. The Duke remains silent while the brown-haired woman continues to hold the baby in the background. Elizabeth's large green eyes sparkle as she reflects on the moment she first fell ill. Reassuring his son, the Duke states that the baby is stable and mentions a new development. He has secured nutritious goods from the kingdom of beyond, much to the delight of the children.
The Duke mentions their mother's favorite tea leaves as he reflects on the first queen's diplomatic actions. A memory shows the first queen consort engaging in diplomacy, startling the two listening children.
The Duke insults a high-ranking official as Julius laments being buried under the post-incident paperwork.
Elizabeth looks up thoughtfully, her large eyes filled with curiosity about the palace's ongoing political shifts. Narrative text notes that the last time she saw them, they appeared to be quite at odds. She wonders if the queen might be good, but a sudden chill makes her shiver in fear.
In a bubbly bath, the Duke asks about the diaper while the baby shouts a protest.
The red-haired man and his two children share a peaceful moment in a massive, sudsy bathtub. The Duke instructs Julius to maintain his magic regulation, and the boy dutifully agrees while bathing. Julius looks pensive in the water as Elizabeth worries about the uncertain future that lies ahead.
The purple-haired baby feels more reassured when her father says it during their bath. Julius asks his father, "I'll be returning to the academy soon, but will you watch over Elizabeth, father?" Duke Walter replies to his son that he has important work at the royal palace. Holding the sleeping baby, the Duke states that it is time for His Majesty to take action. Elizabeth's large green eyes sparkle with innocence as she rests safely in her father's strong arms. Elizabeth panics at the thought of an awkward atmosphere returning, screaming a desperate, "No way!" Narrative text identifies Elizabeth Waltzer as a flurry of activity surrounds the growing young girl. Elizabeth experiences a sudden growth spurt, her mana glowing brightly as everyone watches in complete amazement. Elizabeth reflects that her mana buildup stopped and she is healthy without any lingering curse effects. The energetic toddler sparkles with joy while crawling confidently across the ornate and sunlit palace floor. A pair of large, strong hands reaches down to pick up the playing purple-haired toddler. Elizabeth wonders, huh? As her father lifts her up, looking at her with a stoic expression. Elizabeth is prepared for travel as the Duke readies a carriage for their departure together. Dressed in his formal military uniform, the Duke holds Elizabeth securely as they prepare to travel. The Duke informs Elizabeth that she will be living in the royal palace for a while. Wearing a frilly bonnet, Elizabeth pouts unhappily while looking out the window of the moving carriage. An ornate carriage rumbles toward the palace while the family and their attendants travel inside together. Julius enthusiastically declares his goal to become friends with his subordinates while carrying a training sword. Duke Waltzer informs the blue-haired woman that he is leaving Elizabeth in Adelina's care. Elizabeth worries about things becoming awkward since the woman didn't want to say her name. Duke Waltzer sits silently in the carriage while Elizabeth remains perched in a basket beside him.
Elizabeth asks Uda, and her father replies that she will understand the situation eventually. Adelina stands with her arms crossed in the library, her blue hair flowing over her shoulders. The Duke claims he reports everything about Elizabeth to the woman while holding a document.
The blue-haired woman looks down at the paper with an intense and focused yellow-eyed gaze.
A formal document confirms that Elizabeth Waltzer is now under the care of Adelina Waltzer. Adelina protests the sudden arrangement, but the Duke tells her not to get so worked up.
The Duke insists Elizabeth will be fine while the baby crawls away on the library floor.
Adelina complains that the arrangement doesn't help, but the Duke has palace business to attend. Adelina mentions that the king must take action regarding the recent Nacrea disease case. The Duke looks back one last time before stepping away, leaving Elizabeth in Adelina's library. Adelina lets out a long, weary sigh as she processes the sudden responsibility of the child. Adelina asks a maid to make some tea, and the maid agrees to the request. Adelina works at her desk while Elizabeth sits on the floor nearby with her toy. Elizabeth looks up from the floor, her green eyes wide with curiosity about her new environment. Adelina focuses on the documents at her desk, her face appearing notably pale as she works. Elizabeth wonders why Adelina doesn't keep many attendants compared to the dozens typical for other nobles. A maid brings a cup of tea, and Elizabeth notes the tea is finally served. Elizabeth senses mana coming from the tea as a sudden knock sounds at the library door. Adelina's attention is drawn to the door as the sound of a knock interrupts her work. A man enters and asks the chancellor to approve documents as a cold sweat breaks. The brown-haired man is visibly startled to find a small baby sitting on the library floor. Sweating nervously, the man asks the chancellor to please approve the documents he is holding. Adelina tells him to leave them, but he insists his superior requires immediate approval. Elizabeth thinks the man is being extremely rude for bothering Adelina while she is so busy. Adelina realizes the man is a new hire who started last month, catching him off guard. Adelina mentions that they would love to recruit a specific woman as a civil official someday. Stunned, the man wonders how the blue-haired woman could possibly know that specific piece of information. Adelina maintains a calm and knowing expression as she looks at the shocked and sweating man. The man gapes in utter disbelief, his face pale as he reacts to Adelina's incredible knowledge.
A maid shouts an apology while a toddler sits nearby in the grand library. Elizabeth reflects that her mother Adelina's memory might even surpass her father's impressive intellect. Working at her desk, Adelina is noted for being remarkably fair, regardless of social status. Narrative text explains Adelina's meritocratic system for hiring palace officials, favoring talent over noble birth. A document slips from the desk, catching the attention of the purple-haired baby below. The toddler crawls toward the fallen paper as the maid watches her movements with curiosity. Elizabeth gazes intently at the document, her large green eyes focused on the complex writing. A small hand reaches out and pats the paper with a sudden and determined movement. She slaps the paper, babbling a "ta" as she signals that the information is incorrect. The maid offers a deep apology while Adelina watches the baby from her ornate desk. Lifting the child, the maid notes the ink on her hands as Adelina looks on. A close-up reveals Adelina's sharp golden eye narrowing as she considers the baby's strange behavior. Examining the document, Adelina confirms that the number on the paper is indeed completely wrong. Surprised by the revelation, the maid lets out a shocked "eh" as she looks at Elizabeth. The maid asks if Elizabeth is a genius, while Adelina dismisses it as a mere coincidence. Lifting the baby higher, the maid lists her meticulous habits and perfect memory of daily routines.
Adelina looks thoughtful, wondering if the Duke himself was always such a meticulous and observant man.
Amid a backdrop of blooming flowers, the maid joyfully declares that her young lady is a genius. Adelina watches the child intently, noting that a talented individual is a valuable resource for the country. Taking a quiet sip of her tea, the blue-haired woman continues her work at the desk. Narrative text reflects on the future reputation of the woman, known as a nation-toppling wicked lady. Elizabeth feels that something is strange, wondering if Adelina is simply misunderstood by the general public. A knock sounds and the red-haired Duke enters, announcing he has something very urgent to discuss. Adelina assumes he has come for Elizabeth, but the Duke immediately clarifies that is not the case. He presents an invitation from the second queen consort addressed to both Adelina and his daughter. Adelina attempts to decline by claiming poor health, but the Duke notes he is already aware. Holding the toddler, the Duke firmly declares that he will be the one attending with Elizabeth. The room falls silent as Elizabeth, Adelina, and the maid react with expressions of absolute shock. Narrative text describes the complex political weight and social meanings behind high society tea parties hosted by ladies. These events serve as vital hubs for exchanging critical information on fashion, trends, and various palace secrets. They are also battlegrounds for determining which noble factions and families currently hold the most political influence. Successfully navigating these social gatherings is crucial for forming connections and gaining a significant advantage in court. The scene shifts to the massive and beautiful royal palace under a clear and bright blue sky. Narrative text identifies Elizabeth Valzer as she prepares to attend the upcoming and prestigious tea party. Even as a baby, Elizabeth finds herself being dressed in formal attire for the high-stakes social event. Two servants, Sarah and Sophie, are officially introduced as Elizabeth's new and dedicated personal palace attendants. A memory shows Sarah being bold enough to speak her mind even when facing the terrifying Duke. Another memory reveals Sophie's intense loyalty, promising to protect the young lady even with her life. Elizabeth reflects that the real reason for the attendance is Adelina's complete lack of childcare skills. Getting ready, Elizabeth expresses her deep reluctance to approach the first queen based on her past life. Looking at her father, she worries that he, like her brother, might not have many true allies. Filled with new determination, the purple-haired toddler decides she must expand her family's connections and influence. The grand hall is filled with noblewomen in elegant dresses as the social event officially begins. Hiding behind her fan, a woman mentions the surprising news that the Valzer family is attending today. Gossip continues about Adelina's illness and how the first queen handled diplomatic matters in her place.
A blonde woman stands at the center of the gathering, surrounded by admiring noble ladies and followers.
The blonde first queen stands poised and elegant, embodying the power and status of her royal position. One noblewoman makes a sharp comment about those lacking elegance at such a refined royalty party. The first queen offers a gentle sentiment about loving every citizen, earning price for her apparent mercy. Another woman notes her father's claim that Duke Walter looked truly terrifying at the recent evening party. Noble ladies gossip about Duke Walter's supposedly violent nature and Adelina's recent and unfortunate misfortune. A sudden click-clack sound echoes clearly as a polished shoe makes a firm entrance. The red-haired Duke appears in his grand uniform, captivating everyone present with his majestic presence. He walks through the hall, his arrival creating a sudden stir among the gathered noblewomen. He confidently announces that he and his daughter have arrived per the first queen's invitation. He presents little Elizabeth, both wearing matching red outfits, as she babbles a happy greeting. The guests are stunned to see the Duke and his daughter in coordinated formal attire. Elizabeth giggles joyfully, held securely and safely in her father's large and protective arms. The local noblewomen are immediately charmed and blush deeply at the adorable and heartwarming sight. The Duke stands tall as his gaze turns toward the high-ranking ladies at the table. The first queen sits at a lavishly set tea table, surrounded by her inner circle. Approaching the table, the Duke politely thanks the gathered group for the prestigious social invitation. The blonde first queen offers a greeting, though her tone seems notably sharp and pointed. He explains he used a loophole in the invitation to attend as his wife's representative. Elizabeth's charm offensive begins as she captures the attention of the nearby and swooning ladies. The first queen thinly accepts his reasoning, agreeing to let the matter go for now. The Duke stands patiently, his stoic expression softening slightly as he holds his small child. Elizabeth reflects that getting past the initial and daunting social barrier was surprisingly and notably easy. She points toward the table decorations, asking her father to pick a specific yellow flower. He complies without hesitation, asking if that is the specific flower she wants to have. Elizabeth sweetly offers the rose to a startled lady while the Duke watches her closely. The brown-haired woman is shocked and touched as the baby hands her the floral disc. The Duke notes that he recalls a specific and interesting comment once made by the woman's husband. Overwhelmed by the gesture, the lady blushes while her companions react with excitement and glee. A nervous lady watches the queen's reaction as the baby continues her rounds of the table. A sudden tug at her skirt causes the light brown-haired woman to cry out in surprise. She immediately scoops up the child, unable to resist Elizabeth's overwhelming and undeniable cuteness. Elizabeth babbles a sweet inquiry about her well-being, leaving the lady completely and utterly smitten. A fanning noblewoman scoffs at the group's unseemly behavior in the presence of royalty. Unfazed, Elizabeth celebrates her social success with a bright, happy, and very energetic cheer. More women join in the adoration, finding the toddler's energy simply irresistible and highly charming. Elizabeth realizes that her baby-like charm is a potent and effective weapon in high society. She resolves to use this influence to secure her family's political standing and future safety. The woman in green clears her throat with an ahem, seeking to regain social control. She asks the Duke if he has already tested the young lady's nascent magical potential. The lady insidiously mentions the Duke's wife's illness, causing Elizabeth to perk up in confusion. A chill fills the air as Elizabeth senses a dark shift in the conversation's tone. The woman continues her mockery, and the Duke's expression becomes truly terrifying, dark, and menacing. Back in the library, the blue-haired Adelina is hard at work reviewing stacks of documents. She recalls Elizabeth pointing out an error earlier with a sharp and sudden little pat. A subtle and rare smile plays across Adelina's pale face as she thinks of the child. She notices a report about a suspicious magic beast material being offered to the queen. Realizing something is amiss, she decides she must go and investigate the situation personally. She finds it hard to believe the Duke is actually attending a high society tea party. Adelina steps out of her office, hoping that no trouble has occurred in her absence. A sharp and cold voice cuts through the garden air, asking what was just said. The Duke radiates a menacing purple aura as the terrified woman claims she only stated facts. A mental replay shows the woman questioning Elizabeth's parentage based solely on her unique looks. Elizabeth is struck by the comment, realizing her hair color matches neither of her parents. Sensing her deep distress, her father provides comfort with a gentle and reassuring back pat. Baby Elizabeth looks curious as her father notes her resemblance to his life. The red-haired Duke holds Elizabeth, who is surprised by the comparison to her mother. He identifies specific facial features they share while the toddler wonders about his meticulous observations. Radiating a menacing purple aura, the Duke brooks no objections from the stunned noble ladies. The blonde first queen remains composed behind her fan as guests watch the confrontation. Elizabeth throws a frantic little tantrum, shouting her refusal to cooperate with her father. A brown-haired noblewoman trembles in fear, privately labeling the Duke a barbaric and terrifying man. Smiling behind her fan, the queen accepts the situation while the noblewoman watches with intensity. The brown-haired lady sits alone at the table, looking visibly shaken and deeply distressed. The high-status gathering continues with the Duke and his daughter seated at the main table. Elizabeth notes that proximity to the host at a tea party signifies great social importance. Other noblewomen observe the central table, gauging the power dynamics within the grand palace garden. With a sharp snap of her fan, the first queen orders a change of tea. Attendants arrive carrying trays of food and refreshments as the prestigious social event moves forward. The queen introduces a special tea gifted by a neighboring country's ambassador, served in elegant cups. The gathered noblewomen are delighted, praising the beautiful appearance and lovely aroma of the tea. One lady compliments the Queen's diplomatic success, while the Duke enjoys tea with his child.
Elizabeth stares grumpily at a cupcake, her inner thoughts showing her growing annoyance and frustration.
A hand reaches for the treat as a voice identifies the Duke's specially imported tea. The brown-haired noblewoman suddenly has a cupcake shoved into her mouth, looking completely caught off guard. Blushing in embarrassment, the woman begs for forgiveness while the Duke maintains his stoic presence. He explains Elizabeth simply wanted her to enjoy the Queen's sweets as the baby babbles.
The blonde queen dismisses the incident, chalking it up to the harmless behavior of a child. Overcome with shame, the brown-haired woman excuses herself and quickly walks away from the table. Nearby ladies are charmed by Elizabeth's energy, finding her antics to be quite adorable. The queen compares Elizabeth's energy to her own daughter, whom she describes as quiet and reserved.
Narrative text explains that the first queen's daughter is currently away from the palace studying abroad. Gossips mention the second queen's sons are kept from the public to avoid offending the first queen.
The Duke faces the first queen directly, the air between them thick with unspoken political tension.
He shocks the crowd by revealing that Elizabeth was previously under the influence of a curse.
The queen's gaze sharpens as she demands to know why he is sharing this now.
He claims he is sharing good news, adding that the curse's medium was a palace noble. Elizabeth feels uneasy, wondering if exposing the curse to the other nobles is a wise move.
The first queen remains silent behind her fan, her eyes reflecting deep calculation and hidden thoughts. The Duke warns that the king will act soon, causing Elizabeth to realize his strategic intent.
Elizabeth marvels at her father's political maneuvering to force the king into taking immediate royal action.
A dark-haired servant leans in to whisper an urgent and confidential message to the Duke.
A hand reaches down toward a woven basket where the young lady is resting comfortably. A maid feeds Elizabeth from a bottle while the Duke walks away to handle official business. The brown-haired noblewoman glares at the baby from a distance, her expression filled with dark malice.
She watches a maid carrying a tray of hot tea, her eyes narrowing as a plan forms.
A close-up of the teapot appears as the woman decides that her moment has finally arrived.
The woman makes a clumsy show of tripping, a fake and gleeful smile crossing her face.
"Oh!" Elizabeth cries out as hot tea spills toward her basket, while the Duke looks back alarmed.
A gloved hand suddenly intercedes, shielding the child from the scalding liquid as the basket tips.
Adelina makes a dramatic entrance, standing tall and protective over the baby in her yellow dress. With her golden eyes glowing, she coldly demands to know what the woman did to Elizabeth. Adelina radiates a terrifying power as she repeats her demand while the queen watches in shock. The brown-haired woman is paralyzed with terror, sweating profusely under Adelina's intense and murderous gaze.
A finger points accusatorily as a voice desperately tries to dismiss the attack as mere clumsiness.
The brown-haired maid stands trembling, her face pale with shock and sudden, intense fear.
The noblewoman glares with cold fury while the terrified servant struggles to find any words.
The maid bows low and tearfully apologizes while Adelina watches the scene from a distance.
Elizabeth rests in her basket as thoughts suggest the countess manipulated the servant for a trap.
Elizabeth wonders if those of lower status are always destined to suffer in high society's games. Adelina notes that even minor mistakes in the palace can lead to severe and fatal consequences. The blue-haired woman warns that harming a noble child is a crime punishable by immediate death. Standing before the blonde first queen, Adelina identifies the high stakes of the servant's public failure.
The first queen remains silent behind her fan as the maid continues to weep in terror.
Prostrated on the ground, the servant and her companions offer desperate thanks for the queen's mercy. Elizabeth watches the intense political exchange, noting the high expectations placed upon a powerful royal chancellor.
Adelina prepares to depart with the baby, her calm demeanor hiding the tension of the encounter.
The Duke and Adelina stand together in the garden, surrounded by the whispers of nearby guests. Observers gossip about the strained relationship between the Duke's family and the mysterious lady named Adelina. Adelina dismisses herself to return to her duties, a request the Duke accepts with stoic brevity. A look of surprised realization crosses Elizabeth's face as she senses something hidden in the interaction. As Adelina walks away, she ponders a sudden and lingering question about the situation she left.
A firm hand suddenly reaches out, a quick, light rustle sounding as he stops her mid-stride.
Elizabeth babbles a soft sound as she mentally urges her father to follow the blue-haired woman.
The Duke follows Adelina through the palace corridors while noblewomen watch their departure with intense curiosity.
A reddish-brown-haired noblewoman expresses her outrage, labeling the Duke's behavior as completely barbaric and rude. The first queen coldly informs the lady that her words will be reported directly to the king.
Withdrawing her favor, the queen cancels her intended gift and dismisses the lady with an apology.
The desperate woman pleads for the queen to wait as she is abandoned in the palace hall. Back in private, Adelina inspects a red burn on her arm caused by the spilled pee. While cleaning her wound, Adelina reflects on the oppressive nature of high society and magical power.
The Duke sits with Elizabeth, considering the harsh reality that those without power are often oppressed. A soft, careful dab sounding, Adelina treats her injury while the Duke notices her hidden pain. Adelina remains quiet as the Duke watches her from the doorway, realizing she was truly hurt. Elizabeth wonders about the reason behind the tension, just as a quick, firm knock sounding. The Duke requests a private moment with Adelina, who grants him permission to enter her study. He offers a small, ornate gold container, extending his gloved hand toward the surprised blue-haired woman. The Duke explains the medicine is for her burn, making Adelina realize he saw her sacrifice. He points out her unusually slow reaction time while Adelina looks down at her injured forearm. The Duke reveals magic hindered his movement, a claim that shocks Adelina given the palace security. While he wonders who would dare use magic, Adelina warns that identifying the culprit is dangerous. Elizabeth realizes magic was used to freeze her father and wonders who the secret caster could be. Adelina questions the safety of leaving Elizabeth in the palace, but the Duke insists it is necessary. He reports that the first queen is already moving to distance herself from the disgraced palace nobles. Adelina adds that even neutral supporters are being targeted in the queen's new political purge. A memory shows a lady attempting to secure influence through connections to the Duke's ill wife. The Duke credits Elizabeth's charm for successfully winning over the Martianists during the earlier Tea Party. He stresses the importance of their new alliance, while Elizabeth notes their shared, stoic, emotional masks. A soft glow surrounds the Duke and Adelina as they share a moment of mutual professional respect. The Duke begins to say something more, his gaze softening as he looks closely at Adelina. A mental image shows Adelina heroically shielding Elizabeth from the scalding tea with a quick motion. Adelina insists that protecting the child was a simple task she was fully capable of handling. The Duke prepares to visit the knights and leaves instructions on how to care for the baby. Adelina watches as the servant carries the resting toddler toward the doors of the quiet library. She wonders at the Duke's unexpected parenting skills, comparing his current warmth to his past coldness. Elizabeth observes her father's unexpected gentleness while pondering the irony of a tyrant's parental care. Her thoughts are interrupted by the steady, rhythmic sound of Adelina's footsteps echoing through the hallway. A sudden, loud splash sounding as fresh water is poured into a large metallic cooking pot. Adelina prepares a meal, noting her inability to breastfeed while a maid carries the purple-haired baby. Elizabeth anxiously wishes for her father's return while Adelina converses with the servant in the kitchen. A sharp, wet slicing sound accompanies a horrific scene of fallen men and fresh blood staining the floor. Standing amidst the carnage, the Duke holds his sword while his knights wait for further orders. Stepping away from the massacre, the cold-blooded Duke orders his subordinates to clear the bodies away. In the quiet library, a young, reddish-brown-haired boy approaches the maid holding the young Lady Elizabeth. The boy greets Elizabeth with a warm smile, his golden eyes filled with kindness and genuine affection. Elizabeth is momentarily overwhelmed by the boy's radiant and sparkling presence as he beams at her. Letting out a soft "gah," Elizabeth shielded her eyes from what felt like a blindingly bright aura. Julius explains that the king has commanded a formal manna examination to be conducted for the child. Elizabeth is startled by the news, while Julius suggests checking if the curse left any lasting effects. He notes his parents' absence due to royal duties, justifying why he came to oversee the test. Julius observes Elizabeth closely, remarking that interacting with her feels like talking to a mature young woman. He praises Elizabeth's intelligence, while the maid giggles at the idea of the baby being a genius. Elizabeth dismisses the praise as an exaggeration, though she remains calm under Julius's admiring and focused gaze. She is impressed by Julius's composure, recognizing his competence as the acting head of the Walter family. The scene shifts to the drawing room where an elderly man with a staff awaits the group. The newcomer is identified as Pendragon, the chief royal mage, who carries an air of immense wisdom. Julius introduces himself formally as the family's representative, while the maid keeps Elizabeth comfortably in her lap. Elizabeth reflects on her past life's lack of power, recalling the struggles of being an ordinary girl. Memories resurface of more talented children being prioritized for adoption while her past self watched from shadows. She spent years perfecting her control only to perform menial tasks, suffering under society's disdain for commoners. Now reborn, she uses her honed mana control to effortlessly guide her bottle through the air.
Elizabeth clutches her necklace, silently hoping that the previous curse hasn't interfered with her current magical potential.
Pendragon smiles kindly at the child, remarking on her vibrant energy and the life in her eyes. The chief mage's expression suddenly turns serious as he senses the girl's surprisingly respectable mana levels. Elizabeth glows with a vibrant blue aura, wondering if the old man can truly see her hidden power. Julius is impressed that the chief mage attended personally, a sentiment Pendragon met with a soft chuckle. Pendragon handles a parchment, noting that children are the precious treasures who will shape the kingdom's future.
He instructs the maid to place Elizabeth's tiny hand on the testing surface to begin the mana evaluation. With a gentle touch, the servant helps the young lady reach toward the center of the peggle. A soft, quick rustle sounding as Elizabeth's small hand makes contact with the enchanted mana testing paper. A surprised ooh of wonder erupts as a massive, blinding column of golden light fills the room. Julius and Pendragon stare in absolute disbelief at the magnificent and overwhelming display of raw magical talent. The chief mage declares Elizabeth's mana is powerful enough to make her the greatest sorceress in history. Elizabeth recalls that her infant self possessed such immense excess magic that she could even manifest spiritual clones. The group remains in stunned silence following the revelation of the child's nearly unprecedented level of power. Pendragon addresses Julius and refers to the Duke, his tone shifting toward a more serious analytical observation. He clarifies that Elizabeth's specific power is categorized as external mana, a distinct and rare form of magic. Julius is immediately suspicious, demanding to know the deeper implications of the chief mage's cryptic technical description. Pendragon dismisses his concern with a wave of his hand, claiming he had no ill or hidden intentions. He ponders which type of mana the Chancellor might possess, while Elizabeth watches him with growing, silent unease. Explanatory text distinguishes between internal mana, which enhances the body, and external mana, which creates physical phenomena. Elizabeth's gaze lingers on Pendragon as she wonders why her specific mana signature seems to bother him. Julius calls out her name, noticing that the young lady has become lost in her own deep thoughts. Elizabeth is snapped back to reality, looking up at her brother with wide, curious, and slightly startled eyes. The Duke returns to reclaim his daughter, firmly asserting her identity as a true child of the Waltzer bloodline. Julius asks the Duke why he hasn't yet departed for his planned nightly duties. A luxurious carriage stands parked in the middle of a heavy downpour outside the palace. The Duke explains that a mechanical issue with the carriage delayed his departure from the grounds. A soft chuckle sounding as the Duke, holding Elizabeth, explains the journey is postponed until tomorrow. The Duke observes his daughter closely, noting her appearance makes her heritage undeniably obvious to everyone. A mental comparison highlights how the purple-haired Elizabeth looks exactly like the blue-haired Adelina once did. Pendragon stands with Julius and the maid, preparing to share more information about the family's past. The elderly mage confirms that Adelina was an exceptional student, topping her class at the academy. He explains that her condition was initially called Necrea disease before being identified as a curse. Text transitions the scene, reinforcing that the ailment was a curse that took hold of her. Julius and Elizabeth look on in shock while the Duke remains silent, lost in dark memories. Pendragon declares that since the affliction is magical, it is time for the mages to intervene. A close-up of the mage's eye captures his focus as he moves to a new topic. He suggests a royal marriage for the daughter as a way to secure the family's magical needs. A massive flare sounding as the Duke's killing intent erupts, terrifying Julius and the nearby maid. Pendragon notes that such a political union is impossible as long as Adelina remains prime minister. A diagram illustrates the Weltzer faction and the complicated political ties involving potential marriages and royalty. A soft, dark swirl sounding as the Duke dismisses the marriage proposal as a total waste. Elsewhere, the Queen drinks tea, noting that receiving an invitation from the king is quite rare. A blonde-haired man reports that the chief mage performed a mana inspection on the Waltzer child. Sitting at a table full of sweets, the man identifies the child's hidden condition as a curse. A soft chime sounding as the blonde man decides he will manage the developing situation himself. The Queen eats a snack in silence, her expression revealing nothing of her inner political thoughts. A sharp wooden clatter sounding as the blonde man stands up to leave the royal tea party. The Queen asks why he is leaving so abruptly without finishing his tea or the conversation. A fresh lemon tart and a cup of tea sit untouched on the white tablecloth outdoors. As the man walks away, the Queen calls out a request for a sweeter tart next. A maid waits patiently outside the Grand Palace structure as the royal meeting comes to an end. The blonde-haired Queen looks off into the distance, her gaze cold and filled with hidden ambition. Back in the study, Pendragon takes his leave while the Duke and Julius watch him to brought. The group stands in the quiet drawing room, the tension lingering even after the mage has gone. Julius turns to his father with a serious expression, stating he has an important request to make. A soft, quick breath sounding as Julius recalls the earlier mention of a potential royal marriage. Julius's eyes glow with an intense, frightening light as he demands a carefully selected fiancé for Elizabeth. A low, cold hum sounding as Julius vows the suitor must be strong enough to defeat him. The maid realizes that given her status, she will never be able to marry her lady. The mood shifts as Julius asks his father to finally speak about the truth regarding their mother. The Duke looks at his son and agrees that it is finally time to reveal the secret. A flashback shows a younger, hopeful Julius, his golden eyes shining with innocence and genuine joy. Adelina is shown working at her desk, her blue hair falling over her elaborate, light-colored dress. A soft, wet scratch sounding as she dips her quill into ink, documenting her findings on magic. A close-up shows a cup of tea, its surface shimmering under the light in the quiet room. Adelina takes a break from her research, her expression reflecting the weight of the secrets she carries. Her notes reveal a terrifying discovery that her disease was never an illness, but a targeted curse. A memory depicts her worry that her child would inherit the curse, despite what the doctors claimed.
She recalls watching Julius grow, believing his strong spirit made him a worthy heir to the house. Narrative text details her past honors and the ease of her life before the affliction took hold.
A flashback shows a girl with purple hair, happy and carefree while clutching her favorite book.
A dark silhouette captures the tragic memory of a child falling ill and losing her young life.
The scene ends with a close-up of purple hair, a lingering symbol of the family's tragic past. Adelina glows with mana, fearing she would hate her own child for having magical power. A soft, rhythmic scratching sounding as Adelina pens her private thoughts onto a piece of parchment. Adelina works in the library, comparing her current situation to the parents who once abandoned her.
She reflects on her past foolishness while standing alone outside a set of ornate double doors.
Adelina walks through the palace corridors while clutching a set of important documents to her chest. She explains how she survived a deadly injury by sacrificing her magic to sustain her life. The red-haired Duke gestures forward while maintaining a stern and focused expression during the family meeting. Adelina is caught off guard by the Duke's presence, her eyes widening with sudden, visible surprise. The family gathers in the drawing room, where the Duke addresses his children and royal attendants. The Duke explains that some nobles become magicless, a condition formerly known as being a nasha.
Explanatory text details the rare process of converting raw magical energy into life force for survival.
Julius listens as the Duke discusses Naisha's banishment and Adelina's policy of recruiting talented commoner orphans. Elizabeth realizes that Adelina's inclusive policies likely stem from her own personal experiences as a commoner.
The Duke's eyes glow with intense green light as he dismisses those who only value status.
Narrative text clarifies that Adelina's frequent physical attacks are the result of her severe mana depletion. The Duke suggests that consuming mana naturally through food is the best recovery method for Adelina. Julius agrees with the Duke, wondering if providing high-quality, nutritious meals would offer even more benefits.
Julius notes that a researcher named Tesua was already investigating that specific method of mana restoration.
The Duke orders the butler to maintain relations with House Leas while the maid listens nearby.
The Duke instructs the maid to allow the visitor to enter the study without further delay.
Adelina enters the room with a calm expression while carrying several documents in her slender arms. She inquires about the status of the mana inspection while noticing the group's serious, collective atmosphere.
A close-up captures Adelina's gentle smile as she looks toward her family with genuine, warm affection.
Julius greets his mother warmly while keeping the young Elizabeth nestled safely within his protective lap. Elizabeth reflects on her previous life, comparing her current situation to her past as an orphan. She credits Adelina's hard work for allowing a commoner like herself to become a court official. A book lies open detailing how Adelina was unfairly branded a wicked woman by her enemies. Elizabeth remembers being bullied in her past life for being a commoner without any magical ability. Elizabeth realizes Adelina shared her struggles, resolving the mystery of why the prime minister position was vacant. Julius asks the baby if she wants to be put down while she makes small noises. Elizabeth crawls across the carpeted floor with determination, surprising Julius as she moves away from him. The young girl reaches out to pull on Adelina's dress, startling the blue-haired woman with persistence. Elizabeth babbles while internally protesting that the current narrative regarding her mother is completely and totally incorrect. A stylized layout shows the family members as stickers, illustrating the whimsical nature of the moment. Elizabeth becomes animated and loud, desperate to communicate her disagreement with the family's somber and incorrect conclusions. The Duke watches with intense focus as Elizabeth babbles, her sounds closely mimicking the word mother. The scene lingers as Elizabeth clearly enunciates a sound that everyone interprets as calling for her mother. Adelina is visibly shaken and moved, asking if the child was truly addressing her as her mother. Julius smiles and confirms that Elizabeth was undoubtedly calling out for her mother in that sweet moment. Elizabeth continues crawling, secretly annoyed that her babbling was misinterpreted as a genuine call for her mother. Adelina lifts Elizabeth into her arms, wondering why the child seems so exceptionally happy and energetic today. The baby laughs with pure joy, her bright eyes shining as she is held by Adelina. A low, cold hum sounding as a dark, overwhelming aura erupts from the Duke, terrifying Julius. A soft, quick rustle sounding as documents scatter and the Duke falls to his knees in shock. Adelina remarks on Elizabeth's ability to humble the Duke, while the child focuses on a nearby document. A close-up shows a formal document regarding the upcoming founding festival, which Elizabeth is now inspecting. The Duke broods over the festival while shouting at Elizabeth to learn words other than mother.
Julius urges Elizabeth to learn new words for the Duke's sake, which she rejects with babbling.
3 men kneel before the king in the throne room, reporting on the kingdom's recent political developments. A broken pen rests on a tray, symbolizing the Duke's growing suspicion toward the royal palace. Julius aims to expand his influence at the academy by networking with other noble students. He calculates that gathering intel from aristocrats' children will prove highly beneficial for his family. The red-haired Duke strides through the palace corridors, maintaining a regal and commanding presence. Elizabeth appreciates the Duke's affection, but spends most workdays being cared for in Adelina's office. The baby sits quietly on the floor while her mother diligently manages palace business. Elizabeth celebrates her new developmental milestone as she successfully pulls herself up to stand. A baby's foot lands softly on the floor as Elizabeth begins moving on her own. Determined to improve her mobility, the young girl focuses intensely on learning how to walk. Adelina reflects on the taste of her tea as Elizabeth gets used to calling her mother. Elizabeth babbles a sound resembling father, prompting Adelina to ask what the child is saying. The maid explains that infants often babble without intending to convey any specific or complex meaning. Adelina accepts the explanation, while the maid notes Elizabeth's babbling is a sign of healthy growth. The sun shines brightly over the towering, ornate spires of the grand royal palace structures. 2 high-ranking officials walk down a carpeted hallway to attend a secret meeting with the Duke. A gray-haired man in a formal brown coat is identified as Margrave Karl Grenz. A low, heavy creak sounding as the official prepares to enter the Duke's private study. The Duke and the Margrave meet in the library to discuss sensitive matters of national security. The Duke requests the Margrave to skip the formalities and get straight to the point. Karl Grenz reflects on the Duke's tragic past and the cold person he has reportedly become. Despite his internal reservations, the Margrave declares his unwavering loyalty and remains on high guard. The Duke announces significant changes to the security protocols for the upcoming Founding Day Festival. Karl Grenz is shocked when the Duke assigns him command over the entire capital's external security. The Duke temporarily grants Karl authority equal to his own to handle all matters outside the palace. Karl finds the plan to patrol the entire capital with mage soldiers to be absolutely preposterous. The Duke explains that a first-class mage will assist in ensuring the kingdom's barriers are flawless. Margrave Grenz accepts the orders and promises to submit a detailed security proposal very soon. As the meeting ends, Karl remains suspicious of the Duke's sudden and uncharacteristic show of trust. A close-up of the Duke's face reveals his sharp, calculating gaze as he watches the official. A soft, rustling sound as Margrave Karl Grenz bows deeply before taking his leave. The Duke advises Karl to work hard for his own benefit during this critical period. Karl concludes that despite the rumors, the Duke is the most dependable man for the king. A small yellow chick glows with magical energy while resting in a pair of open hands. In his bedroom, Julius wonders if he will be the first to successfully master this magic. Elizabeth secretly encourages her brother to focus on their father instead of her own developing powers. The baby resolves to try her best, even if the Duke feels more formal than parental. Julius pauses mid-thought as he realizes something important about the upcoming royal festival events. Elizabeth remembers reading about a horrific demonic beast attack that occurred during a past founding festival. She recalls how the royal family was endangered during the slaughter despite the Duke's overwhelming power. The memory reveals that the incident served as the catalyst for the Walser family's eventual downfall. Formal text describes the prestigious founding festival, an event held only once every 5 years. The grand festival invites distant nobles and showcases national treasures to display the royal family's power. Elizabeth fears that if history repeats itself, the royal family will be targeted during the festivities. If an attack occurs, her father would be blamed, leading to the total ruin of their house. Despite the weight of her memories, Elizabeth stays with Adelina in her busy palace office. The young girl remains under constant supervision while her mother manages the kingdom's complex affairs. Elizabeth notes that she is always accompanied by 2 personal attendants who watch her every move. A soft, quick thud sounding as Elizabeth's foot makes contact with the carpeted office floor. Determining she must act on her own, Elizabeth begins pushing a stool across the room. Surprised by the baby's actions, the maid excitedly calls for Adelina to witness the moment. The Duke bursts into the room in a panic, demanding to know what happened to Elizabeth. The red-haired Duke observes from a distance as the purple-haired Elizabeth sits quietly on her rug. A brown-haired maid excitedly reports that the young lady has successfully pulled herself up to stand. The Duke is overwhelmed with regret for missing the milestone, while chibi Elizabeth remains completely unfazed. In the quiet study, Adelina works at her desk while the Duke mentions the magic crystal he offered. Adelina explains that the crystal will be displayed among the national treasures during the upcoming festival. The Duke declares his firm intention to personally oversee all aspects of the internal palace security. Adelina agrees with the plan while a steaming cup of glowing pink magical liquid is carefully prepared. She notes the Margrave's extensive connections make him the ideal choice for managing the capital's external security. Feeling revitalized, the Duke offers to personally assist in overseeing the management of the kingdom's treasures. He presents a massive stack of documents for her review, significantly adding to her mounting workload. Elizabeth watches her parents from the floor, noting her father's rare, satisfied expression as he leaves. Narrative text explains that Adelina had been struggling with the severe, lingering after-effects of a curse. Elizabeth observes her mother closely, knowing they transitioned to a specialized magic-based purification recovery method. A maid pours tea as text clarifies that magic-infused meals are vital for Adelina's steady recovery. A soft, liquid splash sounding as the glowing pink magical tea fills the delicate white porcelain cup. Elizabeth reflects on the relief of seeing her mother thriving in good health during this current life. Sitting on the floor, the purple-haired infant babbles loudly to catch her mother's busy, focused attention. Realizing she cannot leave the energetic child alone, Adelina decides to keep Elizabeth by her side. Adelina balances her administrative duties with motherhood, holding Elizabeth while tackling a mountain of kingdom paperwork. Elizabeth takes the opportunity to secretly inspect the important government documents scattered across the large desk. Her eyes widen in realization as she spots the name of the chief royal mage on a document. Looking out the window, Elizabeth realizes the paperwork details vital defensive measures against impending demonic beast attacks. A close-up of the child reveals a sharp, calculating gaze as she weighs her next strategic move. Margrave Karl Grenz walks through the palace corridors, his presence signifying shifting political ties and alliances. Elizabeth babbles urgently while tugging at her mother, making it very clear she wants to go outside. A maid steps in to offer her assistance, promising to take the young lady for a walk. Adelina gives strict instructions to the maid, ensuring the child stays within the safety of the courtyard. Elizabeth crawls across the carpeted grass, pretending to play while keeping a close eye on her surroundings. Alone on her rug, the baby focuses her internal energy to manifest a small, golden spark of magic. Karl Grenz informs an official that the Duke will be hosting a special dinner featuring favorite venison. Elizabeth wonders if her father's sudden warmth toward the Margrave is a sign of a genuine friendship. Her brow furrows in thought as she worries about the potential complications of these unexpected political connections. Elizabeth remembers that in her previous life, the conservatives were firmly allied with the hostile First Queen. Official text reveals that various guilds will be granted authority equal to the royal knights during festivities. Julius confirms he will distribute the official notices to all relevant parties across the kingdom immediately. Karl Grenz discusses how the chancellor has successfully swayed a significant portion of the opposing political faction. Julius expresses genuine shock at the news of Adelina's growing influence and her successful political maneuvers. Sitting on the rug, Elizabeth realizes the current political landscape is shifting away from the original timeline. Karl Grenz identifies a specific tea party as the catalyst that triggered the current conservative shift. Elizabeth is stunned to realize her presence at that social gathering completely altered the course of history. The Margrave credits the event organized by the First Queen for the recent change in political atmosphere. He reflects on the audacity of the man known as the Tyrant for entering a social gathering. Karl Grenz smiles with a sense of satisfaction, pleased by the unfolding political developments within the palace. Elizabeth remains on her rug in the courtyard, deep in thought about the impending, dangerous festival events. Clenching her small fist, she resolves to be fully prepared for whatever dangers the future may hold. Julius holds Elizabeth, thinking about how their military-focused family usually avoids such large-scale social events. A memory of past social gatherings serves as a reminder of the family's traditional and isolated reputation. Despite the peaceful setting, Elizabeth experiences an overwhelming sense of dread about the coming festival days. The sun illuminates the palace towers as the grand day of the founding festival finally arrives. Dressed in matching formal attire, Julius carries Elizabeth toward the Crystal Palace to inspect the national treasures. Elizabeth holds the glowing chick spirit, which chirps its enthusiastic agreement with her secret plan. Navigating the crowd, Julius tells Elizabeth to behave herself, but she refuses to promise compliance. Julius looks down with a concerned expression, questioning the likelihood of a magical beast attack. The small yellow chick spirit looks incredibly nervous while admitting it has absolutely no idea. They approach the Crystal Palace as Julius decides that being safe is better than being sorry. A sinister, dark background featuring many watchful red eyes sets an oppressive and foreboding tone. Nobility from across the country arrive at the palace for a private viewing of the treasures.
Elizabeth reflects on the magic crystal, which saved her life despite its role in false accusations. Nobles whisper about the tyrant's red-haired son, prompting Julius to cast a sharp, intimidating glare. To distract the judging crowd, Elizabeth unleashes a blindingly cute smile to charm the surrounding guests.
Tugging on her brother, Elizabeth demands he join the charm offensive and stop pulling away. Elizabeth demonstrates a pose for her hesitant brother, encouraging him to follow her adorable lead. Julius forces a charming wink and smile, instantly winning over the hearts of the nearby noblewomen.
A brown-haired woman claps in delight, completely captivated by the children's sudden and overwhelming cuteness.
Elizabeth considers her operation a success while Julius remains annoyed by her choice of codenames. The two enter a magnificent glass hall, looking up in wonder at the sheer architectural splendor.
Elizabeth's eyes widen in surprise as she scans the crowd, sensing a hidden and unusual presence.
Guards remain stationed throughout the opulent hallway while the purple-haired girl looks for signs of danger. A soft, magical poof sounding as Elizabeth manifests a tiny, glowing spark of energy in her hand. A knight reports that the capital's disturbance was suppressed thanks to the leadership of Margrave Grenz.
The blonde knight acknowledges the update, stating that a simple report to the captain will suffice.
Elizabeth reflects on her father's past absence and wonders if he can make it this time. Clenching her fist, Elizabeth feels confident in her father's strength and the power of his men. A triumphant, loud blare sounding as the royal trumpeters signal the start of the grand unveiling. Knights and officials stand at attention on the stairs as the formal treasure ceremony officially begins. The king stands beside Michael Walzer, announcing the unveiling of the kingdom's most sacred national treasure.
A large sheet is pulled away as the king addresses the crowd within the kingdom of Eltode. A massive, brilliantly glowing pink crystal is revealed, pulsating with an immense amount of ancient magic. The assembled nobles gasp in amazement, praising the crystal as a beauty worthy of royal status. Julius watches in wonder, surprised to learn that his father was the one who originally discovered it.
As the guests admire the artifact, narration suggests that everything has turned out for the best.
Elizabeth stares intensely at the crystal, sensing a malicious energy hidden deep within its bright glow.
Julius notices the leaking mana, while Elizabeth realizes it matches the feeling of the family curse. A chilling realization strikes Elizabeth as she recognizes the magical aura from her mother's previous suffering.
Julius looks shocked and serious, confirming that the energy feels exactly like when the curse activated. Sensing an immediate and grave threat, Julius decides they must inform their father of the danger.
A knight stops the boy, asking for his identity before promising to relay the urgent message. Across the hall, the peaceful festivities continue as nobles dance and chat without any suspicion.
Julius expresses frustration, realizing that the tight security measures are preventing them from reaching their father.
Elizabeth remembers the records from her previous life, which detailed a catastrophic magical beast attack. She worries that her intervention has altered the timeline, making the coming danger even more unpredictable.
Elizabeth spots the woman responsible for her mother's past injuries and looks at her with anger.
Pointing urgently, Elizabeth identifies a glowing bracelet as the source of a growing, malicious purple energy. The bracelet on the woman's arm explodes with purple light, opening a portal for the beasts.
Julius holds Elizabeth tightly and wonders if they are too late to prevent the impending disaster.
A terrifying, multi-headed beast emerges, shocking Elizabeth as it differs from the records she remembered.
A sharp, metallic clang sounding as the royal knights draw their swords to face the threat.
The beast lunges toward the crowd, but Elizabeth remains hopeful that the knights can handle it. Julius summons his magic to defend his sister, while Elizabeth tells him not to wait her. Elizabeth realizes the monster is targeting the king and queen, creating a desperate and dangerous situation. The king holds the dark-haired queen closely while a chaotic scene unfolds around them.
Elizabeth realizes she cannot reach her destination in time as she unleashes a magical blast.
Michael Walzer stands before a snarling beast, vowing to prevent any further harm today. A powerful slash from the Duke's sword cleaves through the massive horned magical beast. A terrifying howl echoes as another beast lunges toward the group from the shadows. The red-haired Duke remains calm while striking down the creature with a single, precise blow. A violent thudding impact sounds as Michael delivers a powerful kick to the monstrous intruder.
The beast is sent flying through the air, away from the terrified guests and royalty.
Julius protects his sister while the Duke stands firm amidst the blood-spattered wreckage of battle. The crowd bursts into applause as Elizabeth and Julius admire their father's overwhelming martial prowess. Holding his wife, the king asks Michael if the queen has escaped the encounter unharmed. The Duke commands his knights to secure the perimeter and prevent any beast from escaping. Michael orders the total annihilation of all remaining magical beasts within the palace's grand halls. Elizabeth is surprised when her magical chick spirit glows, signaling her brother's arrival on the scene.
A brown-haired woman in a blue dress flees the scene while looking incredibly distressed.
Julius catches sight of the fleeing woman and resolves to intercept her before she disappears. From a high vantage point, the young boy is seen chasing Lady Malta through the gardens.
Panicked and sweating, Lady Malta looks over her shoulder while trying to escape into the darkness.
Julius notes the woman's surprising speed as he continues the pursuit while holding his baby sister.
He hesitates to use his mana to catch her, fearing it would draw too much attention.
Lady Malta continues her frantic flight through the hedges, her breath coming in ragged gasps.
Julius and Elizabeth come to a halt as they encounter a sudden and unexpected development.
A masked figure in black suddenly seizes Lady Malta, silencing her with a gloved hand.
Back in the hall, Michael Walzer continues to slaughter the beasts with relentless and brutal efficiency.
The battle-hardened Duke stands victorious over a pile of slain monsters, his face stained with blood.
A knight reports to Michael that the interior of the palace is now free of threats. The Duke orders his men to maintain their guard despite the apparent end of the skirmish.
The surrounding nobles whisper in awe and terror at the lethal power displayed by the Duke.
A blonde woman stares in shock at a small, trembling creature huddled near a bloodied corpse. She notices the stains of human blood as Michael begins to clean his gore-covered blade.
The Duke uses a white cloth to wipe the blood from his sword and determined face.
A nobleman scolds Michael, arguing that a knight should show more consideration toward a lady. Michael dismisses the criticism, stating his priorities as a knight were focused on the immediate threat.
The official protests that the Duke's lethal response to a young beast was unnecessarily excessive.
Adelina intervenes, explaining that magical beasts grow rapidly and must be finished off immediately. She warns that allowing a beast to escape would endanger the entire capital and its citizens.
The Duchess questions if the noble believes it is acceptable for others to suffer for his comfort.
Michael intimidates the man with a chilling aura, while the official cowers in sheer terror.
The king commends the Knight Commander Michael Walzer for his swift and effective response.
The blonde queen with the fan questions how the beasts bypassed the palace's thorough security. The king notes that the appearance of monsters during a major festival is a grave matter.
In the distance, the royal group discusses the damage done to the dignity of the crown.
Peering over her fan, the first queen declares that the royal family will be held accountable.
A snap sounding as the purple-haired queen closes her fan to address the assembly's leaders.
The first queen demands to hear the knight commander's thoughts regarding the severe security breach.